Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I normally would have said something nicer, but I said, welcome to the live stream. I love you, all my vegan people. It's very hot today. I am in a tank top, so if it feels a bit indecent, I am sorry about that. It's just very, very hot today in Amsterdam. It's a very hot period. But we're getting over it. In a couple of days, it will be over, and I will be able to sleep more and better. Uh, and yeah, and maybe do even more outreach because I've been avoiding it because of the heat. But needless to say, thank you for being here. Without further ado, I will introduce the one, the only, as vegan.
Howdy, everybody. Good to be here. Good to be with you, Chip.
Good to have you here, Has. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself, Has. I think it's easiest to start this way. I sometimes I like to introduce guests, but if the guests give me a description to introduce them, I usually introduce them. There are some people who have given me descriptions. I'm like, oh, this is kind of what I wanted to do. I'm like, okay, sure.
No, that's
Uh,
so difficult. It's like on dating profiles where it says like, I'm not single anymore, but where it says like add a little thing about yourself, and you're just like, how do I condense myself into 3 sentences? But where do I start? Well, I've been vegan for almost 12 years, and I got straight into activism and experimented with a whole bunch of different methods of activism. Started out with like kind of a weird combination of just handing out leaflets and not getting into conversations, just literally like, I live in Chicago. We have a lot of busy train stations and stuff like that. So I was literally just standing and handing out leaflets to people. Just like, here, take one, take one, take one, that kind of thing. And at that time, I also started doing disruptions, which is kind of like a weird juxtaposition, because in one, you're just standing there and handing something out like a robot could, and then in the other case, you're like, in people's faces. There's people with you standing up on tables and shouting and stuff like that. So I kind of, within those two poles, if you speak. Oh, Existential Seeker lives in Chicago too. That's awesome. um, so within those two poles, I kind of started to drift into my own style. Finding that outreach was something that I found really interactive, and something that kind of like helped me feel like I was actually making a difference. I think part of the difficulty with activism is that it's so difficult to assess metrics. We
it's
don't
true.
know the effects of different types of outreach, and there's lots of people on the non-vegan side telling us, like, not us part in specific, but telling some vegans, that their outreach is turning people away. And then we have other vegans who are saying, yeah, I agree, some vegans are turning people off, turning people away. And it's hard to find that area, that sweet spot where you feel like you're actually helping. But we can get into that later. So basically, I kind of also participate in a number of protests. So different things like anti-aquarium, anti-rodeo, anti-circus, anti-horse-drawn carriage, anti-zoo, anti-fur. Basically, for a while, for several years, I was just going to as many different protests, and even attended like a welfarist thing once about like bigger cages and stuff like that, which kind of exposed me to what I don't want to do, which helped me understand more of what I do want to do. Um,
Okay.
right now, I'm kind of like mostly focused on doing outreach, and I think that protests and single issue things they still have their place, but I think there's a difference between animal rights, and there's a difference between that and veganism. And I guess what I try to promote is animal rights in the form of veganism.
Yeah, that's a very good one, right? Like, I feel like animal, when we go out there and speak to people, we propose the solution to be veganism, but we speak on behalf of animal rights, right? So it's two different things. It's not, they kind of are very much related to each other, but it's not that you have to, like, you don't have to care about animal rights to be vegan. Um, I feel, right? You don't, do you?
Um, yeah, that's a topic that I am actually very intellectually drawn to, because I think that it's possible to be like, in the topic of rights, a moral non-realist where you reject the idea of rights.
Okay.
And
In that
you
sense.
can still be a moral non-realist vegan. You can say that no one has rights, but it's still preferable to be vegan. I tend to fall more on that side of things, honestly. Like I don't think that rights were discovered. I think that there's something that we recognize. Like I think they're inherent to beings. I don't think that they're granted either. I think people just sometimes choose not to recognize or choose to ignore others' rights, but I think that those rights are there regardless. They're intrinsic.
So I think we there's a difference where there's rights like legal rights, right? Where yeah, they're created by humans, and there's rights which are, as you claim, intrinsic, which are basically conceptual, and they more signify the idea that it's more of a freedom thing, isn't it? Right? Freedom, rights are somehow related to freedom, are they not? Like the right to implies the freedom to, right? So it's a concept to in that sense. But like if you think about the right to your own body, maybe it is still freedom to choose what you want for your own body and freedom to live your life, right? After all, at the end of the day, so it is kind of much of a concept. Well, at least that's how I see it. Maybe I don't see
Yeah,
necessarily
that's a
the
good
same.
insight. And I realized that, toward the end of my last sentence, I said intrinsic rights. So I kind of did allude to there being some kind of rights. And that's where it gets tricky because it's like, what is that exactly?
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit of a cop out to say that you can't hold a right, you can't see one, you can't give one to someone, and therefore they don't exist. Just like I'm trying to think of an example. You can't see the stock market, but we know that it exists.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something that I'm kind of a little bit agnostic on, I guess. I don't claim to know whether rights exist or not, but nevertheless, yeah, I think, like you said, there's things that we can recognize in others. And I think that also it's not just the freedom to do things, but it's the freedom to have things not done to you, like so-called negative rights.
It's a good one. Yeah. Let me write this one down. Actually, I'm gonna see if I can use it somehow. I like
Terry
how it
says
sounds.
enough, or says, oof, not philosophy crap.
You not philosophy.
How about we talk about philosophy?
Are you gonna have a talk with Harry about Predator? I am, but we haven't set a date yet. I need to contact him on that. I have a bit of a busy days these days, so I'll come back with some news later. To say that again, Has, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, maybe to please Terry, we won't talk about philosophy. We'll talk about falafel.
Falafel.
Philosophy.
Philosophy. Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's do it. Falafel philosophy. A falafel is best if it's not deep fried. But that's my own take on it. I
Oh
like them
yeah,
roasted.
that's just exactly what I was gonna say. I don't want to be up here promoting deep fried food. I think it's cancer causing, promotes hardening of arteries, raises your triglycerides, all that stuff. But how can you make a good falafel without frying it?
Air fry it.
Ah,
Bake it, basically.
yeah, bake it. It's just I've never made one from scratch, but I would think that if you make like the ball, chickpea flour is actually pretty versatile. Like you can make like I don't know if you ever made like little pancakes and stuff like in a
Omelets
pan.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would think like if you just made it a little bit denser and then put that like just form like kind of a little ball with it and then put it in the air fryer, you could make something that resembled a falafel.
Yeah, that's true. You could. Yeah, I mean, I haven't used chickpea flour myself. I used chickpeas, well, in a can, and just blend it up and then put them in the oven, and they always come up nice because the way I make them is I don't add a lot of flour. I just make them. I leave them a bit wet, so then they dry up in the oven. But let's go into the interesting stuff, right? Let's go into
Oh,
this
I
activism
thought this
stuff.
was interesting. I'm just joking.
Yeah, it's interesting to some people. I don't know. I don't, it's falafels are good. We all love falafels, you know. But let's go into this awesome. By the way, Has, what's your moral philosophy that you follow, like in general? Like, do you have a moral philosophy that you follow?
Very interesting question. I apologize in advance, Terry, for continuing on this vein. But so I had a very interesting talk with ChatGPT about this, and I was asking ChatGPT, make a case for veganism from a deontological perspective. And then I said, tell me like the weaknesses of this. And it said, it's too rigid, or these things are subjective in terms of like where people draw thresholds, and so on and so forth. But it said, the positive of it is that you have a very clear definition on the surface, on paper, but it kind of fails a little bit when it comes to real world applications. And then, of course, some people talk about being threshold deontologists, which, we don't need to explain what that is. And then, there's people who, then I said, do the same thing for utilitarian veganism. And it made the case like, well, generally speaking, there's environmental benefits, there's health benefits, there's benefits of contributing less to animal suffering, especially if you see suffering as like a negative utility. You can make a very good case actually for veganism from a utilitarian perspective. And the same goes for virtue ethics. So it's those main three: virtue ethics pertaining to things that we want to cultivate within ourselves, like compassion, nonviolence, and patience with other animals and things like that. Tolerance. So what ChatGPT proposed is that maybe the best way to understand veganism is actually a synergism, a synergy of taking aspects of the deontological thing, like, we should respect the rights of other animals. We should extend rights to them as far as we can, insofar as they would be interested in those rights. And then also taking a utilitarian calculation at some point saying, hey, like, sure, maybe having pasture-raised cows isn't going to be as destructive to non-cow life, for example, as factory farming might be. Or maybe that got a little confusing. Like, how people say if
I
you
was gonna
pasture raise.
say it sounds a bit double negative there.
Yeah. Let me clarify. So, people will say that if you pasture raise a cow, you kill less animals in general than if you eat a box of crackers or something that's vegan, because it relies on monocropping and kills animals, etc. And then it gets into the whole really murky waters of quote unquote sentience hierarchies and all that stuff, which I hate having to get into.
Yeah.
But it was saying maybe you could apply some kind of calculation about the sustainability, like the ability to scale that kind of thing. It may very well be the case that a pasture-raised cow, eating them and the amount of calories that somebody would be able to derive from murdering a pasture-raised cow would exceed the amount of calories that somebody could derive from eating plant-based crackers that, without killing as many animals. But then you also have to think about the scalability. And if the pasture-raised cow movement expands to where everybody's wanting to do it, then it's not scalable. So, I think it's important to also think about the future a little bit from this utilitarian lens, and look at scalability.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, if you talk about utilitarianism, I don't think pasture-raised cows are in any form or shape utilitarianistically better than factory farming. I think factory farming is monumentally better for everybody, including the animals. And it might sound like I know I have a weird opinion about that, but like, well, in fact, there's pros and cons, right, to both. And I have been reading about, there's a study even that looks at this, or it's not a comprehensive study whatsoever, but it does look into it. And there are pros and cons to both. But you could argue that factory farming actually, you use less land for factory farming. you kill less animals in the end because you keep the animals inside a lot more. You
They
can
don't value their
give
lives as much as the
exactly. They don't value their lives as much, right? Yeah,
presumably.
presumably. Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, all of them see them as products, right? All of them. It's just one sees them as a product that, oh, I need to take care of this so that the product becomes better, and one sees them as it's a product, we're going to give the consumers what they want. That's it, right? It's not like, yeah, smaller farms, they see them as still products, but like products where I want to take care of this product. I want it to be good so that people buy them. But at the end of the day, everybody commodifies animals. All of these industries, they commodify animals, right? Like lately, I've been thinking a lot about this idea that if they wouldn't be like, their sentience means nothing in this whole industry, which is insane if you ask me, right? Like even if you were to exploit them, they still don't um take into consideration their sentience at all, right? So like
It's
they're
an
just
inconvenience to the industry. If
it is
they could
sentience
just
is
be
an
dead. Yeah,
inconvenience.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's seen as like they're basically they're born with sentience. They have sentience, but that doesn't matter to them. What matters is their body and what their body does. Their sentience doesn't matter. Their personality, their anything. Basically, if I were to ask you who you are or who am I, it's most of the things that kind of consist of my sentience, a combination of sentience and intelligence and experiences that I've had throughout my life that define kind of who I am, right? Whereas with any of these chickens, there's no who the chickens. I'm sorry, I said chickens because when I think factory farming, I think it's the first thing that comes to my
sure.
mind.
I mean, that's a
Um,
salient example. Yeah,
yeah, but when it comes to any animal, really, they don't think about who they are, what preferences they are. No, it's product, product, product. Does this animal not feel good? And does that like I feel like if there's a question, does this animal not feel good? Okay, does this make the product worse? Then no, then I don't care. Does this make the product better? Then yeah, I care. That's it. They
yeah,
only care about making their product better.
yeah. Every step of the way. I mean, whether it's like ripping the testicles out of pigs or cutting the beaks of the chickens, all of those things, they're just designed to make their job easier, less quote unquote damage to their product, and the fact that they're alive makes it very difficult to package them up. You know what I mean? Basically.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's insane to me. It's all of it is insane. And I promote I'm for GMOs because usually they're very well controlled, and I've been looking into it myself, their studies and whatever. I know there's controversial opinions there, but like I feel like if some farmers could genetically modify cows to not have sentience or any of these animals to not have sentience, I think they would definitely go for it. Like I don't think they care about that because I think that's the whole thing. And in that situation, I kind of wonder myself, like how are we supposed to like? I feel like if you ask me, sentience is not just about, I mean, there's obviously the personality, the subjective experience, but if you can remove all that and just, let's say you can't remove the pain receptors because those are throughout the body, you can't remove the nerves and all that. So they would still feel pain and they would still kind of have some form of feeling there, but no interpretation of that. Like somehow you make the brain less smart. I still
Yeah.
think that's wrong, right? That would still be wrong.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. I have a million places that I want to go with it, but I guess I can start by saying that the sentience of the animal, I think, is pivotal to their intrinsic value.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a video about intrinsic and extrinsic value, and my original goal was to basically talk about anatomical substrates, if you will, of sentience. Like, what kind of gives rise to sentience anatomically, and then compare that to similar structures in plants and make the argument that, yeah, plants are alive. They have highly evolved systems. They have cellular mechanisms that help them breathe, and they avoid threats, and they even recruit other, sorry, not other, but they recruit animals to eat, like the animals that are eating them, for example. They'll give off different
Yeah, they have
signals.
mechanism.
Trees
Yeah,
talk
for
to
that.
each other, like that he was saying to you. Yeah, that's all true. But I guess the question is, where does the value part come into that? You know, if you have like just this like transparent screen and you slide that over and the screen just pertains to value, what shines through that screen if it's filtering out anything that lacks value? And I would say that nothing is shining through. I mean, it's kind of like the tree falls in a forest riddle or whatever. You know, if a tree falls in the forest, no one's there to hear it. Did it make a sound? And I would say it did make a sound, but in this case, is there value if there's no one there to eat those plants, to observe the beauty in those plants, to appreciate those plants? It's hard to conceptualize a world where there's literally no animal life. And of course, it might not even be possible for plants to exist, at least in the way they do, without animal life, because especially insects are so instrumental in helping them pollinate and things like that. But you know, where animals are concerned, and where we know that they have like nociceptors, we know they have a central nervous system, it becomes, you know, clearly abundant that there is some type of intrinsic value there. I mean, it doesn't even take a philosophical analysis to know that they'll run, fly, swim, crawl, slither away if someone tries to hurt them. But it is honestly pretty difficult the more that we do learn about plants, because you know, they do try to avoid threats, and there's even emerging research about root systems in plants, about how just proximal to the root, like just closer, there might actually be some kind of a nervous system, almost like a plant is kind of like an upside down animal where their brain is actually underneath the soil.
The thing is, to me, I feel like, yeah, okay, you could kind of see that, but I don't think so. So when we talk about sentience, yeah, there's the capability of feeling pain, and maybe even if plants would have that, right? I don't know if that's the value. I think if you ask me, the value in sentience is in its subjective experience, and in the idea of feeling positive and negative emotions, right? Like that's one, like the fact that they can feel negative and positive emotions, remember the fact that they can remember these positive and negative emotions, right, based on previous factors. That means like I think there's been studies where they show animals that remember this, and they remember it even, they even pass on from from parents to children, these kind of memories. And like if they have that, if they have a subjective experience, if they have a preference, a personality, if they can choose, and I think that's the value, right? Because that means they're someone, right? If pain, I don't think like if I were to create a robot and give them all the sensors and everything, receive pain and run away when there's pain, it doesn't make that robot sentient, does it? It just makes it another mechanism for running away, for protecting their life. But it doesn't mean that they have a preference. It doesn't mean that they experience the world, right? Because I think that's the value, right? I don't
Well,
know.
yeah, it's interesting. So when you talk about pain, there's a kind of interesting value-based way to look at it, where if we talk about like what is intrinsically valuable, it kind of always boils down to pleasure in some way. And when we talk, or not intrinsically valuable, I'm sorry, extrinsically valuable. Like when we talk about,
of course,
like, you know, different things that either affect us positively or negatively, it always comes down to pain, or pleasure. And with plants, there is actually some research going on in botany about not just generational memory or kind of evolved adapted memory or responses, but actually it's been shown that to some degree plants actually can remember things intra life, like within the course of one life, such that they, like if there's somebody who attacked a fellow plant of theirs, that they actually will avoid or give distress signals. They can't avoid, obviously, because they can't move, but, you know, they'll give distress signals around that person. You know, this is all like really interesting subject matter when it comes to the value of, you know, this intrinsic value thing. And I think at the end of the day, it's important. I use the Carnus line at the end of the day. But
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 I'm sorry for interrupting you.
oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
So what I wanted to say is, as a software engineer, I'll just put it this way: as a software engineer, I think I don't, I probably won't be. I think I could theoretically create a plant with enough. Let's say I have an infinite amount of time in my life. I create enough rules, and I can create a plant and create all of these mechanisms for that plant, because they have sensors, they have responses. It's kind of binary, or not even that much, right? But when you have eyes and sound, you need a processing. You need something to process everything that you see and everything that you hear. It's no longer a sensor was triggered or not triggered. It's no longer a substance was in or a substance was out, right? It's you see colors, maybe you don't even see colors, but you do see shapes, you see things that you have to interpret in that sense, right? The same as you would when you hear sounds. You would have to differentiate between which sound is, when that sound ends, when that sound starts, where the sound is coming from. There's a lot of things involved, right? So these aren't just advanced sensors, they are actual interpretations. Like something has to interpret all of this, right? So I think that's where the value of the sentence is, in interpreting sound and like all the other senses that we have, as like feeling as well, maybe, let's say. But like feeling isn't, it's still kind of binary, or not necessarily that binary. Like it's something that you could theoretically simulate with a sensor. But like all these other things, like our visual cortex literally is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's like a bitmap data sent to the brain, something like that. So our brain obviously gets a two-dimensional thing and creates a three-dimensional thing for it, a three-dimensional understanding of it. And we perceive that, and we do something around the world. I think all animals do that. And that's like, no plant does that, regardless of how you think. Like no plant will be aware of their surroundings more than sensors knowing there's a smell or a substance near them. But I don't think they can see or hear.
Well, I would say that, even the capacity to sense things around you and to respond to them, those seem like not like emergent properties of sentience, but more so just of intelligence. You can set your phone to be listening all the time for you to say, "Hey Siri," or whatever, "Hey Alexa." You can, oh, sorry, I just made one turn on. You know what I mean?
Funny.
Like,
Yeah.
and plants, they have, to my understanding at least, developed qualitative sensors where they're not just looking for like a switch on off kind of binary, like this got tripped, this got triggered, this threshold was passed, but more so qualitatively, like I smell this person, or through my photoreceptors and through my vibration receptors, there's a combination of things that are possessed by this entity whom I remember. That being said, I don't think that with plants that there's somebody inside. I think that, going
Exactly.
back to the idea of a subjective experience, I don't think that emotions are even required for it. But I do think that
Good one.
the capacity, like, think about also if somebody was like a quote unquote vegetable, like if they were in a coma, or if they had some kind of peripheral neuropathy, or their whole peripheral nervous system had just been severed to a point where they lacked the capacity to feel any type of physical pain. Presumably they still would have awareness of their experience. That's where I struggle to define sentience, because definitions of sentience that I've seen pertain to that entity having a self-awareness, which normally I've tended to reject that. I've tended to reject the idea that a being has to be self-aware in order to be sentient.
Yeah.
Because I think self-awareness is also something that, for example, like an infant might not have. They might, and there's not really concrete ways to test this, but it's been, theorized before that if they can recognize themselves visually, like in a mirror, that might imply that they're self-aware. Again, it's difficult, and maybe with AI and its integrations with like MRI and CT scanning and stuff like that, we might be able to have a better understanding of this. But like you were
But my
saying,
point,
it's the subjective experience.
yeah, it's the subjective experience. And my point when I said the vision and the sound, it's not necessarily that I think that these create sentience. No, I think that these are symptoms, if I can call them that, of sentience, because I feel like there is no reason, no natural process. Like I would like most of our brain, which is kind of weird, I think, is used to interpret everything we see and everything we hear. In fact, I think like a large portion of our brain is used to detect other human faces, to see the differences between other human faces and all that, right? So like a lot of our brain is used to interpret all this, and there's no biological reason why anybody would develop that unless there is, with after processing all this, there is something to do with that whole process, right? Because if we just process it like AI does, let's say just process it and then gives information to something, it means nothing. The information still has to be something there that does something with that information, and that's basically the self. The self, maybe the self doesn't have the capability of awareness of self, but it still has the capability of interpreting all that data and choosing a left or a right based on what they think is best, right? Like based on previous things, maybe based on some genetics or something. But it's still, there still is some subjectiveness there's to it, right? There always will be some subjectiveness to that.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to think about the way that you're referring to this, when you think about the different symptoms of, so to speak, of consciousness and sentience, because that is kind of reflective of what our anatomical analyses inform us of. We have a central nervous system, but we also have a peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is just there to inform us of noxious stimuli and things like that. And
Exactly.
we have like a background autonomic nervous system, which I can't remember if that's part of the central or the peripheral, but nevertheless, there's background things going on that constantly kind of keep us alive. But it's almost like, it gets into a little bit of like the super unknowns, where like almost like, religious explanations, things like that come in, where it's like, what is the central perceiver? Like, where am I, kind of a thing? Am I somewhere else and my body is just an antenna and it's perceiving my quote unquote soul, or my consciousness is being antenna imported in? Or is consciousness originating within these chemical electrical processes somehow, where it's like consciousness is the whole of all of these processes kind of splattering onto our meat sponge cells? You know what I mean?
I think that's what it is. I think consciousness is something of an illusion, more or less, right? It's we're I don't believe in the whole. By the way, how are you, deterministic or non-deterministic universe, or deterministic or non-deterministic?
I'm a semi-compatibilist, also known as kind of like a soft determinist.
What does that mean? I don't know that. I haven't heard about that. What does that imply?
It's kind of like this idea that we do have we have a little of both. Like, we have both a little bit of free will to decide certain things, but we also are influenced to a great extent by our genetics and life experiences.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But do you believe that there is free will? There is, right? I don't know. Like, do you like? I know there's people who believe it's deterministic, like it's just an illusion of free will.
I'm not completely confident of how I interpret that question. So I'm skeptical of my own intrinsic biases when I interpret that question.
Fair enough.
I think a lot of people misunderstand, and they say, like, if you put 3 Skittles in front of me, can't I choose which one that I want, without my previous experiences dictating it? And of course, it's like one of those things where there's some kind of like confirmation bias, like, or kind of like perpetual skepticism, where you pick it and you're like, see, I picked this one because I chose to. Psych, no, I picked that one. It's like, are all of those still a product of the previous life experiences just slowly unraveling, you know, before the actual choice is bearing through, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm skeptical of it, and I think that, like I said, you know, people misunderstand that aspect of it, the kind of like the real time choice aspect, and at some point they need to drop their skepticism to be like, okay, this was a free will decision. But I think the other thing is that when people say we don't have free will, they might not be talking about those kinds of choices. So like in psychology, there's this idea of modularism where we kind of are in different frames of mind or different kind of like modes of operation where we might not have chosen to get into that frame of mind, or we might not have chosen to be operating from that realm of thought with our own free will, like kind of from that cluster of schemas within our cerebral cortex. We kind of localize somewhere and operate from that, which is largely, you know, I think part of what personality is. But I think maybe within that cluster, we're able to make some different choices, but I don't know if that necessarily pertains to like will, like free will. You know what I mean? Like that might just be free micro choice kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very interesting topic.
It is, because if we dive into sentience, right, and the idea of subjective experience, I mean, free will is right over there, right? It's up for grabs, and it feels like a person who doesn't believe in free will and believes that everything is deterministic could easily make the argument that, well, not even us, we're not that sentient. Not even our choices are that. If our choices are predetermined, then it doesn't. We're no different to any other reactive to stimuli, right? Because we just vastly more complex, but we're still just reacting to stimuli and interpreting and all that, right? So
Yeah,
I,
and
I, I don't think it's that way. If you ask me, I don't think it's that. I think there is some free will there. I can't explain it, but there's a lot of things in this universe we can't explain, and that's one of them. So maybe they're tied together. I don't know.
yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, when we bring it to the topic of activism and I wish there was a better word, maybe advocacy, like when we're pleading the case for
Yeah,
these other species of animals to have consideration from other people. Um, I think it's kind of problematic how we keep hearing about how pigs are smarter than dogs and things like that. Like I don't see the relevance of bringing that up. You know, when people say that, you know, this is like a lot of vegans will try to do this gotcha where they'll say, you know, what do you think about kicking a dog, and isn't that wrong? And then, okay, what if you swap out the victim and place in a pig? Like, I think that's not bad. Like that's a helpful, constructive way of helping people understand their speciesistic biases.
yeah,
But I think that once you start talking about intelligence, you've already lost it, kind of, because it's like that's not what we care about. You know, if
very good
all
point.
non-human animals were extremely intellectually, um, you know, low on whatever scale of intelligence, um, assuming it could even be objectively assessed, it still wouldn't impact my desire for them not to be brutally, you know, killed and to be enslaved and those kinds of things. You know, it's not like I'm like, oh, they're just not really. They couldn't really accomplish much else, or they don't really have a lot going for them anyway, cognitively speaking. So it's fine to oppress them. Like, no, the point is that they're persons, in my view, like they're the subjects of an experience. And that is what I value. Have you heard of the YouTube channel Perspective Philosophy?
No, but that sounds cool. I love
Okay.
philosophy. So.
Yeah, he's awesome. And he's vegan, and he talks about
Ooh.
um, how the what he values is the capacity of other beings to have, you know, subjective experience, to be subjective agents, and that's what he believes makes them morally valuable and things like
I
that.
agree.
So yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah. And I mean, I think I myself have brought up the intelligence things in pigs at times. I don't do it anymore, but used to do it in the past. And the reason why I did it, it's more uh, to kind of give some perspective to it, you know, because I think like people kind of see these farm animals as they are used objects. They see them as just instinct. They just react to instinct. That's all it is. They just bam, 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 bam. That's how they see them. Whereas they're not. They do have some free will. They do have some subjective experience, and that's kind of why I did it in the past. But you're right, it's not a good way of doing it, because it just brings back to the whole intelligence thing, where we don't really care about intelligence, as you put it, right? It's all about the subjective experience, the sentience.
Yeah, but you know, it's just like literally like a minefield, because when you focus on sentience, what do you hear 90% of the time back if you say that, if you talk about how these animals deserve moral consideration because they're sentient? What do you hear? You hear plants, right? You hear plants are sentient too.
The people that know, the people that think they know what sentience is, yes, they say plants. Most people don't know what sentience is. That's
fair
that's what
enough.
I hear.
Yeah. But you know, hopefully what we want is for everybody to be educated to the point where they do know what sentience is. And it's like, you know, we are gonna run into that question. And when we run into that question, it's troubling, because it's, like I said, it's a minefield, because you get into the whole sentience hierarchy thing inevitably, because, you know, the easiest thing to talk about when you're interfaced with a person is quantitative things. You know, it's like, it's almost how we're anthropologically like designed. You know, it's like, we not designed, like, I don't mean that in a literal way, but you know, how we've come about to interact with each other. We say, oh, tomatoes, how much are they? You know, oh, $3, you know, that kind of thing. It's like values. There's quantitative values that are always kind of on the table when you're out in public, someone's across from you, you're talking about. And I think that's what's kind of alluring about talking about the intelligence level of pigs, because it's like, you want to be able to just say something that's going to just like kind of tick a notch in their brain and then give you a basis around which to orient your argument. Yeah. But what kind of can tend to come up, at least in my mind, I don't know if it's even a salient, relevant thing in the mind of my interlocutor in any given instance, but I think about then, can I assume that all plants are equally non-sentient? And even, you know, among humans, or among, maybe to make it less controversial, among non-humans, can we say that all non-humans within a specific species, like let's say pigs, are equally sentient or equally lack sentience? Like if we have trouble, like in there, I mean, there's scholarly papers about this, about whether sentience is on a gradient or whether it's just like an on-off switch. And I'm inclined to see it as a switch, but I don't have a concrete answer. And I don't have a concrete answer when it comes to plants either. Like maybe a blade of grass or a dragon fruit, you know, they have perhaps, if sentience does apply to them, perhaps it's on a gradient. I just, you know, I'm inclined to say, just based on what we know about neurons and brains and central processing, that they don't have sentience. But there is a lot of research in the plant biology world that says that a focus on neurons is speciesist against plants, that it's kind of this hyper focus on one form of biology. Again, I'm skeptical toward that, and I think that the people who do argue for plant sentience are engaged in more kind of anthropomorphizing plants, or not even just anthropomorphizing, but if there was a word for it that didn't say makes them human-like, but makes them animal-like, you know, animal pomorphizing or whatever, zoopomorphizing. Yeah, it's a very muddy topic when sentience comes up, and I try to avoid it. When I do outreach, I a lot of times will try to focus more on virtue, like virtue ethics, and also, and kind of talk to people almost like from the position of like a coach, and say, like, you know, is this something that you want to be doing? Is this something that, do you hate this? Do you hate the idea of other animals, other animals being tortured, stir that passion in them, and then kind of empower them. You know, in psychology, motivational interviewing, there's this idea that You need to show people how bad things are. You need to show them that how good things can be. And then you need to empoweratively kind of talk to people in a way where you're showing them that they're capable of making that change. You know, and of course you hear people talking about how just them changing won't make a difference, how they're just one person, how the meat's going to be there anyway. And when people do that, I sometimes refer to supply and demand, but what I tend to refer to more when people make these arguments from futility is that they have to live with themselves. You know, they have to live with their own choices. So I do approach it more from a virtue ethics perspective in that sense, that like you can be a person who takes justice seriously. And then I try to tell them, like, you know, then you feel that social pressure coming onto them. Like, I don't want to be an outcast. I don't want to be hard to be around. And then it's kind of a matter of showing them like, hey, all these people are vegan. There's people who are going to support you and you'll feel better about yourself, and so on and so forth. So there's so many layers every step of the way where you got to kind of like, I don't want to say pivot, but kind of like stand on different edges of your feet, kind of in a way, you know,
No, I
metaphorically
agree.
speaking.
I agree. And in an ideal world, you would go the route of um, supply and demand for some, and the route of virtue ethics to others, right? Like it's you basically kind of have to, well, I won't say feel, but like you kind of have to know which one would be the right choice for the person that you're faced with when you're doing activism. But
Yeah, it's like, do you
yeah,
hit them in the head or do you hit them in the heart, kind of, you know, like you
exactly.
can confront them with the logic or you can confront them with their self-concept and that kind of thing.
I myself have found that I personally feel that logic works better than feelings, because like feelings, people ignore feelings. People, you know, that's one of our good bad things about us as humans. We can ignore things that we don't like or don't make us feel good, right? We can easily cover one bad feeling with a good one, put it in the back of our head or something, right? Whereas logic is always there. I feel like logic is for us will always kind of, like, I feel like once you logically understand veganism, it's hard to not be vegan. You would have to jump through a lot more hoops than you would if you just feel bad that animals are dying. Because if you just feel bad that animals are exploited or dying, then you're like, yeah, well, crop death, yeah, well, other stuff, right? Whereas logically, okay, I can't make an argument for it logically, so then I don't know. Just that's just kind of how I feel. But I'm also a very highly logical person in my life. I value logic a lot. Like when I was young, in fact, I used to think that logic is worth more than sentience. So, uh,
Well, you know,
so
that might be why you got into computer programming.
good one. Yeah.
But you know, like logic is based kind of in truth, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
of course nowadays it's like a meme, you know, where people say like, my truth is this, your truth is that, kind of thing, where, you know, we all supposedly have like an individual quote unquote truth. But you know,
Yeah.
it does stand to reason that somebody who is interested in truth in general would tend to sway more to the side of logic and value it more because it is based in truth. You know, there's a saying in the fitness community, like, you know, 40 pounds is always 40 pounds. You know, it like people will lie to you, they'll deceive you. Circumstances will change, you'll change, but you know, that 40 pounds is always 40 pounds. You know, it's always there for you, just as it is. You know, it is what it is and it always will be, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the logic behind it also for me. But
So Lewis was asking about that previous conversation, and I saw that you made a post about it, the one that you got cut off on,
yeah.
with that lady at the end. But I'm really interested to hear about how you had said that she kind of came around a little bit. How did you manage that?
So it was an interesting conversation, you know. Like, first of all, she was pretty close to my face. Like I said, come closer to be in the camera, and she was like, okay, okay, so
Close
like that's
talker. Yeah.
close talker. Yeah, she was a nice woman. I didn't have any. problems with her. But the minute I noticed that the minute I mention animals are not sentient or something, she goes like, plants are sentient. She instantly goes to that, and the minute she said that, I felt her starting to be defensive, like, bam, yeah, you know what, plants are sentient, fuck you.
Yeah.
And I think it was my mistake, because she said that her son is um a
Ethical vegetarian.
vegetarian, ethical vegetarian. Yes, exactly. So I'm like, is there such a thing? And that's when she became defensive. That's when I feel like I kind of pissed her off or something, that she became defensive. But towards all of it, I just answered all concerns. I just answered all concerns, and I was normal, honest. I wasn't trying to, yeah, well, you're this, or, I wasn't trying to debate her or show her anything. I was just trying to curb her concerns. And towards the end of it, she kind of understood it, and she kind of let go of it and understood. Like, I told her about the dairy industry also. I don't know if that was in the video. And once she learned that, she's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. And she became a bit more open. I don't know at the end what will happen. The usual, I gave her Gary's speech, and I hope she'll watch it with her son also, because um, and she would still come like with excuses like, yeah, but in my family, vegetarian is good enough. And I'm like, yeah, but is it good enough? Like, don't you still exploit animals?
Yeah,
Yep.
it's hard to convey to people this understanding we have about veganism being a baseline for
Yeah.
morality, and it's
Yeah.
hard for people not to feel like we're telling them that we're better because we're vegan. Um, I try to kind of like almost meet this situation of smugness or superiority being perceived by them with kind of like preemptive. This is what I like about the virtue ethics angle, is that it's kind of like you instill in them this idea that they can be a better person than they are right now. Because think about it
Yeah, I see what
also,
you mean.
yeah, and if they walk away having made those anti-vegan arguments that maybe they've never considered, it's one thing if somebody's just like constantly on the internet trolling vegan posts and things like that, but and watching all the anti-vegan nonsense and getting their same talking points that everybody has all around the world. But it's another thing where they haven't thought about any of those things. You get them to think about those things, and it's horrifying. I'm sure you've witnessed this before. If it wasn't so consequentially awful for other animals, it wouldn't be funny. Or sorry, it would be funny, I mean. But it's like
Yeah.
we see
Yeah.
the gears turning, and sometimes you can see somebody like, humans, we have the capacity to stop and reflect, but honestly, you or I may have witnessed one of maybe 3 or 4, or maybe the only instances that a person's going to have throughout their whole life where they actually do stop and think about this. And
Yeah.
when they make that concrete decision, like, yeah, I just think that, they taste good and that's what's important to me. If they are genuinely, if that's a genuine product output of a code that they're running in their brain for the first time, analyzing this, like, query, what do I think about this? Input, taste, input that, value, compare, and that's what they, that's what comes out. That's terrifying. Like,
Yeah.
you just
That
made
that's
that
the
person unethical.
and that's the problem that I have with outreach more and more, is that I understand the perspective that people are coming from. Food is this thing that brings us pleasure. It's one of those small pleasures in life that you're like, you have a rough job, you have I don't know, difficult life, you have an easy life, you have a boring life, you have a depression, whatever it is. I feel like some, kind of, well, maybe not with depression, but like, um, in general, food kind of is that one thing that gives us that dopamine, that pleasure, that thing that brings us joy, right? So when people hear that something like that is like shit, it's even if they react that and think it's immoral, the minute that they think it's that they need to change, they become defensive regardless, because it's their thing that it brings them pleasure, right? It's that one thing that for them it's that escape from their normal life, that pleasureful thing. And I'm like, but it isn't. I keep trying, like, not lately, I've been trying more and more to say it's not about diet, it's not about food, it's not about you, it's about the animals. That's all it is. Like, you can get great food, you can get all that.
Yeah.
And all the time, people just want to get into nutrition, just want to get into nutrition, just want to get into taste, just want to explain how they basically want to continue eating animals. That's all it is. Like, and to most people, like, if they could eat animal products without any animals being exploited, they'd be like, yeah, of course, I don't care. Right? Like, for them, it's not about the animals. We try to tell them that it's about the animals, but it's not. So it's, yeah, that's why it always comes back to taste also for my arguments, because there's no argument against veganism other than, I like the taste. That's it. Always boils down to that, because it always comes down to that. It
Yeah.
always.
I've seen, a lot of vegans and people who are advocates for a plant-based diet kind of seduced by the ease of getting somebody to accept a healthier way of eating, or
Yeah.
things like that, because and this is something that Justin from Debug Your Brain has talked about. I've never talked to him personally, but I've seen this come up throughout his videos, where he talks about how there's this social psychology angle where people think that if they go vegan for animals, it's the worst thing. Like, and there's studies that have been done on this, actually, where researchers have said, what's your appraisal of this person? What's your opinion of them? And if they're plant-based or quote unquote vegan for health, that's like the most socially acceptable thing, like, oh, I got to get my cholesterol down, I got to lose weight, something like that. It's like this idea that you're doing it for selfish reasons. If you do it for the environment, which is like a little bit less selfish, then it's a little bit less accepted. You become like one of the climate march people, and I don't need to name any organizations, but we know that kind of thing. There's causes around it. The oceans, plastic, overfishing, acidification. I don't even like the term overfishing, but anyway, that's like a little bit more acceptable. It's just a little bit kind of trendy, if you will. But if you're actually like the quote unquote, like the black heart, like type of vegan, you've confronted all of the horrors in their stark plainness, and have just been like, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm removing myself from this, and I'm going to actively awaken people to this reality. People cannot make an easy jump from their life of ignorance and apathy and blissful participation because of that ignorance and apathy within the system, where it's so easy to just go to a drive-through, get a burger, get a pizza, whatever. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for them to then say, no, actually, all my friends and family, these animals deserve moral consideration because they feel pain. Everybody's like, no shit, they feel pain. And, that's why we kind of look for facts to arm people with about intelligence and things like that. But the work of getting people to have empathy for other animals is very difficult. And it kind of almost comes down to just needing to raise people's consciousness in a way, and get them to think on a plane where they're not being so selfish. Dr. Will Tuttle, who wrote The World Peace Diet, he's referred to, and of course the book is called The World Peace Diet, but he presents veganism. He's not presenting a diet. It's called Eating for Social Harmony, and he talks about how veganism is basically an inversion of selfishness. You turn your selfishness inside out. And that's very hard to get people to do, because I think, we have, there's a book called The Selfish Gene, and we have selfishness kind of built into us. We want to survive, and, things like that. So it's a very difficult thing. And, when people talk about taste, the only hope that I kind of see when people talking about that is that they're maybe trying to edge their way in to seeing where we're coming from, but just in that rung out of those three, food, environment, and ethics. And maybe they're just trying to somewhat put up like a token defense to try to edge their way in through the health thing, where if we keep them online, so to speak, on topic for just a little bit, we can maybe then inject, the ethics part of it. But it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So lately I've been trying to move more and more towards ethics and taste, and try to taste, leaving all of this other stuff behind. And I feel like what I have noticed, at least from most of the people that I talk to, is they understand the ethics part of it. A lot of people, they understand it. A lot of people, they agree with it even. Like most people understand it and agree with it. But most people, it's, I don't know if they don't make a connection with their choices that much. Like even how much, no matter how much you explain it, but they understand it, but they don't, how to say it, they don't feel it. They don't feel like it's something that they want to care. They
They
don't
don't care
care
enough.
about it.
Yeah.
They don't care enough. Yeah, maybe they don't care enough. Maybe that's what it is. Because like most people, even if they do understand it, even if they say that they care, maybe a lot of people also say they care on camera and stuff to not look bad. But like I feel like most people, they just don't, even if they understand it, it's hard to say. Like they get it, but they don't get it. You see, I don't know.
There's also
It's hard.
skepticism. Like people are like, why would you spend your time advocating for something that has no benefit to you? Why do you care if other people are
That also, yeah.
doing things unethically and more like, there's always that, whenever you're engaged in humanitarian, or I guess that's the closest word I can think of in this example. There's always that question of, what's your angle? What's in it for you?
Yeah.
What's your motivation? Because, and especially, because there's so many vegans who are talking to people about the benefits that they can expect from going vegan. You can lose weight and you can get healthier and you can drop your cholesterol and stuff like that. And, I think the plant-based nutrition angle, it's great that it gets people, from a utilitarian perspective, it's great that it gets people to try a different diet and things like that. But it kind of makes our work a little bit harder as
Yeah.
outreachers, because we have to deal with people thinking that they can be quote unquote plant-based and eat chicken and fish and stuff like that, flesh.
Yeah, and that's my
Yeah.
problem with it also, right? Like if when it comes to health, the thing is you can say, well, okay, I'll be plant-based 99% of the time, and then 1% I'll just eat animals. Health wise, there's no, you can't argue with that. Like you can't say whatever I eat 1% of the time will not impact me, regardless of how unhealthy it is, unless it's like some cyanide or stuff. There's no way that it's unhealthy for me, right? So then it's like it's ridiculous to, that I find a large issue with this health argument. And it's also that it's not implied that being vegan is healthy. Like you can be vegan and unhealthy. You can eat not processed food, but like high saturated fat, like coconut oil and stuff all day long, and you
Yeah.
won't be healthy. Your triglycerides will still be up. It's not implied. Like it's just like health. I feel like the most ex-vegans become ex-vegans because they have this understanding that veganism is somewhat superior. It makes them feel superior or something, but it doesn't. Like actually, by the way, this lady uh, at the end of the conversation asked me, "Do you feel?" I think it was this lady. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like she asked me, like, "Do you okay? But do you feel better about yourself now?" And I'm like, "No, I feel the same. I do feel the same. I don't feel better as a vegan. I
bad
don't feel."
bad about yourself, health wise.
No, no, no. Like she asked me if I feel better, if I
Oh,
sleep better and all that, and I'm like, no, I just feel normal. And then yeah, she meant health wise. I thought she meant like
like, do you
morally
have
wise. Like,
less
do I?
guilt being vegan or something like that?
Yeah,
It's
I
hard to wrap
don't.
your brain around. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have that. So like, also like when she told me about health, I explained it to her that yeah, sure you can theoretically be, but it's not implied. It's not a given. It's not. We can. I don't like the health aspect of veganism. It's good. I also don't like the environmental aspect of veganism because although there is no debating there that being vegan is environmentally better than any animal product, there's absolutely no argument against it. You can make the same argument where well, I'll eat 1% of the time and it will still be better. Like we don't want that. We like, well, at the end of the day, we don't want people. Um, to be close to veganism. We want people to be vegan. We want people to understand the idea that exploiting animals is wrong. It's
Right. Yeah, and I think, you know, there's things that a vegan would oppose, which people who aren't, like, let me put it this way, someone can live an environmentally more friendly life and not be vegan.
exactly.
And someone can adopt a plant-based diet and not oppose things like the use of animals for entertainment or even like the fur industry and things like that.
Weird, but yeah.
Yeah. You know, in the past, I've thought about whether someone going on a plant-based diet somehow has some kind of an effect on them where they eventually kind of like, it's like going down a slide, and then, you know, the bottom of, there's like a ball pit at the bottom, and that's like, you know, ethics, basically the ethical considerations.
Yeah.
And is adopting a plant-based diet taking them closer into
No.
that? Yeah, it's like there's this idea that people who don't participate in something are less inclined to defend it. And also, like, you know, you see this with kind of with vegetarians where they get grouped in with vegans so much. You know, so many people use them interchangeably. Like, you know, if you
Yeah.
talk to somebody about, you know, what do you think about the animals that we force into slaughterhouses? They'll say, well, I'm not vegan or vegetarian, but something like that, you know, where they'll
Yeah.
group them in together. And I don't think it's intentionally designed to frustrate us and make us like have to earmark something in our brains to then go back and explain later. But I think it does serve as somewhat of a foot in the door when a person is vegetarian or when someone eats a plant-based ish diet for their health, because at least they don't see that, like I had talked about with the steps toward change, you know, seeing the problem, seeing what you're capable of, and then the third step, having the belief that you're capable of actually instantiating that change, like see how bad it is, see how great it can be, rather, sorry, that was the number two, and then see how you're powerful enough to change that. If somebody has adopted a plant-based diet, they kind of are a little bit more close in terms of that empoweredness, you know, knowing that they can make that change.
If if somebody talks to them about the moral side of it,
Yes.
because if
That's
they
a
don't,
big if.
because like I was plant-based, I was vegetarian for 6 years, but throughout those 6 years I had a year of where I was plant-based, and
Was that
I
at the
thought I
end?
no, it
Oh,
wasn't.
okay.
It was in the middle actually. So the reason why I was plant-based in the middle, I was like, it's just a logical extension. I thought to me it's just like you become vegetarian and you eventually become vegan. I thought I was vegan, like
Mm-hmm.
that's just how it should be. I thought it's better for your health. Actually, probably that's what was going through my head. But then I started reading into science, skepticism, and studies and stuff, and I'm like, nah, I can eat exactly as I said just now. I can eat 1% product, animal products. I didn't mean meat because I never wanted meat again. But I thought like some cheese, some yogurt, some eggs, it's okay. I'm not gonna have a lot, but if I have a little bit, it's no problem, right? So that was my thinking, which was I never knew about the ethical side of it. I knew about the ethical side of vegetarianism, and that's kind of why I never wanted to eat meat again, because I thought I don't want to kill animals. That's okay. I didn't know about all the exploitation and murder that happens in dairy industry, but yeah, that was my process. So I'm thinking that people who become plant-based will eventually come back, and if they don't understand the argument, will go back, and if they don't understand the argument of ethics, it's just not going to stick. I think ethics is the only way to get people to be vegan. There's no other way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education that we need to do about this, but we often also get accused of being in a cult or having a religion by a lot of these same people. If somebody says
Yeah.
like I'm plant-based, and we don't want to end up being like close examiner people where we're putting up a magnifying glass and looking at somebody, being like, what do you do, or do you use leather, and do you go to this or that? And a lot of times people will react very much like they've been antagonized. They'll be like, wear fur? No, or something like that, where they kind of have to, it's like, it's treading around identity. They've expressed something about themselves that is at some level more or less part of their identity. It's the same way that, like, if somebody went up to one of us and said, you're not vegan because something, 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 at some level,
Yeah.
it's striking at our identity. So when someone has said, like, oh, I'm not vegan, or I'm plant-based, or oh, I'm pescatarian, or something like that, when we jump straight into, well, do you know that fish feel pain? Or they say they're vegetarian, and we jump straight into, well, did you know that dairy cows get graped, or something like that? We're
Hmm.
basically taking advantage of that one identity related point that they've exposed to us, and kind of seeing them from this tribalistic mindset where they're other, they're not us, we're vegan, they're not, and this is what's standing in the way between them going vegan and not. But the fact is, if somebody is pescatarian, they probably still buy products made with animal skin. They probably
Yeah,
still buy products tested on animals. Um,
sure.
and we don't want to get into this utilitarian thinking in this case. I think when we're talking to them about things that they need to cut out or reduce, and we ought not to hierarchically say in our brains, like, okay, well, they probably buy a jacket once a year, but or once every few years, but they eat fishes 3 times a week or 3 times a month or something like that, and do the calculation. Because no matter what, they're not going to understand not exploiting animals, whether we talk about the the fish, or if we don't, if they say they're pescatarian, for example. So what I tend to do in that example is, like, if somebody says, I'm vegetarian, for example, I start easy with them. I zoom out, and I start with the peripheral issues that generally, like, it's kind of, it comes down to not making assumptions, um, not assuming that they're engaged in more ethical behavior than they may actually be. So I'll ask them about fur. If they say they're vegetarian, I'll probably first ask, why are you vegetarian? Um, and then, regardless of their answer will be important to me. I'm not going to just cast it off, but it's just going to give me a little bit of an orientation later on when I ask them, like, so what do you think about fur? If they're opposed to the use of fur, then that gives me a huge in, because then I can ask about why they're opposed to the use of fur. And then here comes a little bit of the leading aspect, where I can lead them into saying that basically they oppose the use of fur because it's, we know all the harmful stuff, and it's unnecessary as well. So then I can bring it back and say, do you think that you need cow's milk, cheese, that kind of stuff? And once they can see that they don't, then we start talking about taste, and then we can take
Yeah,
them down that route of sensory pleasure, and whether, that's a good enough reason. And most people, overwhelming majority of people that I've at least talked to, unless they're exhibiting some kind of, dare I say, sociopathic tendency, are going to say that taste pleasure isn't worth taking away from an animal the only thing that they have, which is their life.
yeah, yeah. That's true. Like, most people agree with it, right? And I understand your perspective, but I've been thinking about something lately myself, and that is, maybe we say too much to them. You know, maybe I actually think that spoon feeding them information is not good. I think that if we get them to understand that animal exploitation is bad, and to agree with that, to understand that they're participating in it, regardless of their diet, whatever, pescatarian, vegetarian, lalarian.
Mm-hmm.
If we get them to these things, and to understanding, as you said, that they can't stop, that they don't need to continue, that's enough. I tend to think that that's more than enough. We can't do more than that. If we anything that we try to do more, we just damage these other things. Because if they leave our conversations knowing these three things, then going further, they can make choices, right? But they have to think about it for themselves. Like we're in a sense, when we're doing activism, we're playing this inception game where we have to incept the idea. We don't have to tell them the idea, we just have to incept it. So that's why I think, like, yeah, we tell them a little bit. Like I myself, I'm guilty of this, where I spoon feed them information, where I tell them more than is needed. But I'm leaning more and more recently towards not doing that. Towards, like, even if they say they're vegetarian, as you say, even if they say they're pescatarian, I sometimes do that also. Well, fish feel pain or whatever. But like, maybe I should refrain from all of that and be like, okay, whatever. Let's talk about the animals. Let's acknowledge that, first of all, these animals deserve to live. First of all, that we don't need to do this to them, and that you are involved in this. Do you
Yeah.
understand all of it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Then
It's just hard to have a bridge to that, you know, because they also kind of, there's this predictive element to it where they're like, oh, okay, this person's a vegan. What are they going to say to me? You know, it's almost like if you hypnotize them and you said, act like a vegan, you know, they would say, well,
yeah,
don't you think that these animals deserve to live? And what gives you a right to take their life and that kind of thing, you know? So you don't want to fill the predictive text, you know, like almost like when you're typing, it kind of knows what words you're typing kind of thing.
yeah.
So I
That's
think
also a
we
good point.
almost,
Yeah,
yeah, we need a little bit of a bridge. By the way, I wanted to mention, I saw that on your live stream. I only caught the end of it, but from today, that you kind of changed the question a little bit. And I'd love if we could take some time to talk about just different prompts. I actually have a sign that's coming in the mail today, rather. And I haven't, you know, there's a big opportunity for me to learn from you on this, because my outreach has always been very evidently vegan, very evidently animal related when I've been out. I
yeah,
haven't done any kind of, besides with We the Free, where I had done this 3-minute video challenge where they didn't know what the video was about before they came in. I haven't done any kind of outreach type activity where people haven't known what it was about. Um,
yeah,
so I noticed that you have a pretty high bite rate, if you will. People bite pretty readily.
yeah,
You know, it's easy
yeah.
for you to get people to stop. And I don't know if it's just because you look really friendly and have an open demeanor.
Also,
Yeah. But, you know, regardless, I think, you know, even if I might look a little bit more stern or serious or something like that, I don't know. But I think people will still, if they don't think that they're going to be challenged on their exploitation of animals, I think they'll probably be more likely to want to participate.
100%.
So I got this sign that just says like something like, would you like to participate in a social experiment? Talk to me, or
Nice.
something like that. I don't remember the exact wording, but I've been thinking about how to exactly run this. Because like I said, I've almost always had like a TV next to me playing some kind of footage, holding a sign with some kind of message about animal abuse. And when people walk by, I've said to myself, well, they didn't stop, but at least they kind of like got the message. But I don't think that that's gonna metric out, you know, in terms of the effectiveness of spreading this message. You know, I think it's like the seed blows onto them, but then it doesn't hit any soil. It just gets blown away.
It doesn't, because when I was not vegan, I saw AV, and it meant nothing to me. I thought, okay, it's a nice protest, and I moved on. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even I even stopped. I didn't talk to anybody.
You just stopped and watched
I
the footage.
Yeah, I stopped and watched the footage, but for some reason nobody came and talked to me. I was with my ex back then, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe somebody talked and then we left because we wanted to go or something. I don't know, but like, nothing stuck to me. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing the footage. I remember seeing the people. I remember thinking, wow, these people care. Wow, these people fight. These people are awesome. But I didn't. The message about the animals, nothing at all. Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
think conversations are critical. Um, so
yeah,
I had been thinking about a script where I would talk to people about value. And so I would say, and I use ChatGPT with this as well, where I would talk to people with a leading question that said, what do you think gives someone value? Um, And then I would kind of hone in on that and say, like, if somebody wasn't able to do anything for anybody else, if they couldn't like affect any other causes, basically, would they still have value just by existing? And then from there, see, I'm not totally hammered out on this, but I'm basically thinking about this kind of like question tree where I start with the concept of value, zero in on the fact that humans have intrinsic value, and then ask about other animals who, as far as like we talked about with factory farming, they're just used instrumentally, like their consciousness, their sentience doesn't matter. It's only their extrinsic value for which they're being used, exploited, etc. It seems like a little bit difficult of a question tree, but it seems, at least from the perspective of avoiding controversy and like pissing people off too much, it seems like a pretty safe route. I also really like the Superman thing that you've run before, where you talk about him, taking somebody to his place, and doesn't matter if they're unconscious or he really wants to, or if everybody's doing it, or if XYZ kind of thing. I'm just not sure. I'm trying to think of what's going to be able to be bridged the best toward animals. Like I've even seen this one. I think Harry, him and the activists who help with his activism on his channel, were talking about at it was like a pride festival or parade kind of thing, where and I only caught a little bit of it, but I think it pertained to asking about what they were at pride for, and establishing consensus that both the outreachee and the outreachers agree on human rights, that all humans deserve equal consideration. And then I think where they had kind of bridged that was talking about someone being injected with something that would render them non-human. Like they would look the same and everything, but they would no longer have human DNA. And if that would affect how they would consider them, and then using that as the bridge toward other animals.
That's a very good one. Yeah, like I it depends on what the purpose is, right? I don't think, first of all, I don't think there's a perfect starter. I don't think there is any of it. Like I think you can find the best starters that work for you. I myself have tried a couple of starters. I feel like the hero one is very long. The consent one is very long. I feel like the consent one works really well. Like especially if you have a women kind of understand consent better.
The hero one is the consent one, right? Or
the hero one is, it could also apply to the consent one. Yeah, I think like the hero one I mostly used it for oppression, but they can apply to both. But like they're all kind of the same, right? They're all kind of the same at the end of the day. And I find that this one, where I start with, should the powerful have the right to oppress the powerless? That's kind of where I start now, which is that line from Sky that I got from Sky. And I feel like that's something that everybody understands. And there's no denying, because oppression means prolonged and unjust, cruel treatment, which is exactly what we do to animals. There's no denying that we oppress them. Yes, a lot of them feel blindsided and get like, well, I didn't know you were referring to animals. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You reach that conversation there, right? Like,
the whole point is reaching that conversation.
Yeah, the whole point is reaching that conversation and reaching it to a place where they don't feel blindsided, and they want to continue the conversation and kind of continue being open towards it, right? But like I feel like the point of these social experiments is not just reaching the conversation, but also kind of using it as a baseline for what they believe, right? If they believe oppression is bad, then it should be easy, and you can always bring it back to oppression when you keep discussing about animals, right? You keep bringing it back to oppression.
Yeah.
But if it's consent, you keep bringing it back to consent or stuff like that. Or that was my idea in my head. I never always completely succeed at this. It's always difficult because when you receive an argument, you use the arguments that make most sense, or that you've been.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying has a lot of implications too that we can learn from when it comes to using a person's logic that they give us. I didn't used to do this, but I've gotten more in the habit of, when someone tells me something like a yes or no answer, it's important to repeat it back to them, And this is
That's a
even
good
the
one.
case when somebody's objecting to something. Just repeat it back to them. Give them a chance to edit, modify. Give them a chance to confirm that that's their belief. Because basically, it's not like we were going to use their logic against them ever. It's in our intention.
Yeah.
But we want to assess their values, and if they tell us something that is indicative of a logical process having occurred to arrive at that conclusion, or that answer that they reached, it's good for us to say it back to them and say, okay, so you're saying that, because a lot of times then we'll say, okay, then, and we'll bring it in the animal context, and they'll be like, oh no, I
Yeah.
didn't say that. I didn't say that. That's not what I'm saying. Like, you're straw manning me or something like that. So we don't want to be like too formal about it. Like, okay, per your logic, like, this and this and this, you would be guilty of this or something like that. We don't want to be all like excessively formal about it. But yeah, I think it's really helpful to get them to a point where we can use what they said as a reference point, to be able to go back to it.
And that's the thing, you use them as a reference point. But I think another very important thing about this opener is that a lot of people will learn about veganism for the first time with you. So this opener is valuable also in that sense, right? Because they will relate. If you talk about oppression, when they hear oppression, they might think about veganism again. When you talk about consent, they might think about veganism again. But like, I used to do the would you rather questions, which are a fun way to start the conversations. You start it fast. People are like, yeah, whatever. And you start the
Is that the one? Oh,
conversation.
like, would you rather
Yeah.
talk to animals or have one of their abilities for a day or something? Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it kind of like the fourth question where I asked them, would you rather be a well-fed farm animal who's not free versus a wild animal who's starving but is free? That kind of gets their juices
That's
going.
a good
That's a
one.
good question. Yeah, that's something that really gets most people like, okay, I kind of understand the point. Yeah, see, I value freedom also, so therefore, but that's also kind of it can work against you, because some people will say that, I'd rather be well fed. I don't give a shit. They're not being genuine, because nobody, like, either they're privileged people who have lived in a situation where they don't know what not having liberty feels like, or they're along those lines. But like, the opener is, and I think it's not. I think it's important. The opener, the most and first most important thing about the opener is that it works for you, because if you look genuine, if you feel genuine, if it makes you continue the conversation nicely, that's all that matters. The rest, it will matter a little bit. It will get people thinking, but it needs to feel genuine to you. You need to feel like you're not being entrapped yourself. Like you need to feel like you're not entrapping the other person yourself, right? Like, um, yeah, Sky doesn't like it when I prefix it with I used to participate in it too, but what do you feel like? How do you feel about the animals that we force into slaughterhouse? Sky doesn't like me prefixing that, and sometimes I prefix it, sometimes I don't, based on how the person feels. Like, if I feel like the person might be blindsided, I prefix it. If I don't, then I don't prefix it. So
Are you talking about the prefix of just saying that you used to participate in it too?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that I'm not trying to blindside you. I used to participate in it too. But how do you feel about it, right? Like, it's some people sometimes people even raise their defenses if you say that for some, but for some it kind of you make them not be defensive at the end. And even if they still kind of say at the same level of defensive,
Yeah, I
still better
mean,
than them.
if you compare saying that before or after the question, it definitely makes more sense before.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's kind of like a little bit sounds more judgmental if you say it afterwards a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, also, I think there's value in that. I don't think that that's equivalent to telling somebody like I'm not judging you or something like that. But I think just saying like, or you could say like, I'm going to ask you a question about something that I used to participate in or that I used to do, and I'm not trying to get you into a trap or something like that. I think like, there's a certain kind of like on camera and off camera etiquette, and
Yeah.
that just kind of, I think it kind of brings them a little bit closer to the off camera kind of chip,
Yeah.
you know, where you're just saying like, you're kind of, it's hard when you're on camera with somebody, they feel like they're on the spot, you feel like you're on the spot at the same time, you're having to do this whole thing of defending animals. So I think like just telling somebody like in kind of the off camera casual IRL kind of voice, you know, like, and you know, this isn't something obviously that you don't want them to just get caught in this over complacency and comfort and then snap back and realize like, oh shit, I'm on camera kind of a thing. Like, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
you want to still maintain the quote unquote, you know, keeping the show going on, you know, the show must go on. But at the same time, yeah, I think it can be a little bit comforting. And I don't think that it would cause anybody to feel overly self-conscious or anything like that. As long as you just maintain like the I hate to say kind of performative aspect of it, of just like being in front of a camera and you know,
Yeah,
interviewing.
but you know, it is a bit of performing.
Of course.
You
Yeah.
gotta have a little some performance in it, right? Like there's times when I perform that I forget something. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Oh, I've had it from the top of my head from the beginning. But if I say it like this, they're like, I get it a little bit more. You see, like it's like you're not necessarily performing because I'm not doing intentionally this way, right? I just like in the heat of the moment, I feel like, okay, I'm not gonna say this in the heat of the moment. I'm not gonna say this. It doesn't feel right to say it now. And for me, it was so. For me, there was when starting these conversations, this was this one where this question, which by the way, Mike said, I'm sorry for this. Yeah, Mike, I don't use your discretion depending on the person and situationship. Not everything you do has to be by Sky's approval. Just saying. Yeah, I know. I'm not seeking for Sky's approval. No, I'm just saying that I think Sky makes great points, but yeah, I always use my discretion. Um, but like what I felt was there's this question, right, which I kind of have to find out, and then I realize more and more lately that people will always start discussing society. You know, the minute that you tell them about, well, how do you feel about animals if we force into slaughterhouses for us? And then they start saying, yeah, well, some people need it. Some people, they never talk about themselves. They talk about people, right? So what I used to do in the past, that I was to say, well, yeah, you know, either like say a nice phrase like how Earthling Ed says, we talk about society as a way to uh, uh, ex- uh, exempt ourselves from the responsibility we have as individuals or something like that, I think he says. And I'm like, no, you know what, I'm going to talk about society a little bit with this person. Let's just give them that, like let's talk about society a little bit, let's talk about it in general, and then we narrow it down to them. And sometimes I feel like even then, even when I narrow it down, sometimes maybe I narrow it too fast, and then they become like defensive, because how about when I ask them how about you, they become
Yeah. I think part of the basis of that is that we put so much value into our support systems, our support networks. You know, if you think about everybody in your life abandoning you, like who are those people that would never abandon you, and out and out and out from there. And it's almost like there's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs where, you know, we need sustenance, like survival, and we need, you know, lesser needs, but still pretty important needs are like acceptance, you know, acceptance by others,
yeah.
acceptance by society. And it can be difficult when we see that person's thought process. You know, we can see the gears turning in their brain where they're having to grapple with this idea of considering something that the people who are important to them are engaging, you know, and thinking about removing themselves from that situation. They're thinking about how easy or hard it might be, how much disappointment they might encounter if they come up against those people. And of course, people have all sorts of different fears around social conventions, if you will, like, you know, fear of abandonment and things like that, where they don't want to be the one who's ostracized, who's kicked out of the tribe, you know, like
Yeah.
a lot of our innate responses stem from our human evolution of being in tribes for a long time, you know, and being the one that's kicked out and things like that. So yeah, that can be a really challenging thing. And you know, if somebody has concerns about how they're going to adopt this identity, the kind of best thing I can do in that sense is just what I kind of fall back on always, which is just getting them to focus on the victim, perpetually, and just try to kind of get them to empathize and put themselves in that victim's perspective. The whole, like, the thing where people say, well, society does this and things like that, also can be addressed by saying that it's almost like a slightly more nuanced version of saying, if everybody jumps off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge, kind of thing, but more saying that, like, if you have determined that this is something that is wrong for you, then you can choose not to participate in it. And then you can come up with some tangible examples that don't threaten their sense of belonging and community, like talking about child molesters and other things that are more socially accepted as clearly wrong, and say, you can share. It's like a sharing moment. You can say, well, I am against the molestation and against sexual violence toward children. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that I can do in my day-to-day life to oppose this. There's not a lot of ways that I can prevent other people from doing this, as unfortunate as it may be. But with this injustice, when it comes to the exploitation and slavery and commodification of animals, of non-human animals, I have a choice that I can directly remove myself from this if I'm participating in it. And it's just as easy. Like, I love the idea of, the dairy thing, where you just say, just moving your hand over a couple feet. And this is one of those things where I think it strikes a really good balance between causing a person to feel defensive, which obviously you don't want to do, but you do want to kind of confront their behavior and hold them accountable to some degree. It strikes that balance where you're empowering them at the same time. You're saying, this is really easy for you to not participate in. And at the same time, kind of like gently saying, like, yeah, you're doing something that, is unethical, kind of like holding them to account a little bit, like you can press on that vein a little bit harder, even in the next sentences, where they might try to kind of squirm a little bit.
And that's why the opener, if you start with oppression or anything, it's good to have an example. I just realized that now. Like, if you have an example, then you can always bring it back to that example. An example of something that you said, right? Like you said, child molestation, but an example that's maybe not as, maybe that refers, that's more similar in that sense. I mean, we know it's similar, but a lot of people will not see the similarities. But like, because if you have that example from the start, you can always bring it back to that, and you make your argument that you said just now, which was excellent, by the way. It's a very good idea. You make it with that same thing that they already agreed it's bad, and you just say, yeah, well, there's nothing you can do about that, but there's something you can do about this, which is not participate in it and not be part of it. And that's awesome. That's actually a very, very good point, like, that you made. I like
I
that.
appreciate that. And you do tend to run into some kind of appeals to futility after this, where they'll talk about how they can't make a difference. But I always like to bring up the dairy fridge. I don't know if it's like that in Amsterdam, but at least in the US, there used to just be a very tiny portion of the fridge that was dedicated to plant milks. It would just be a couple bottles of soy milk. And a lot of times it wouldn't even be in the refrigerated section. It would be somewhere on one of the aisles, like, around more centrally to the store.
Yeah.
And there would just be these like little boxes that were sitting there, who knows how long, like shelf stable versions. But now you see, like, literally half of the, not only the milks, but in many places, the yogurts, the ice creams, the dairy stuff in general has basically just been cut in half. The butters, sour creams, cheeses, those are basically like half plant-based now, and not in every grocery store in the US, but in a lot of them. So I think that's another thing that we can highlight to people, that our consumer choices do actually pan out, in terms of real world consequences. I don't know where I heard that, but there's also this idea I don't know if it was in your outreach or someone else's, but about the Great Wall of China. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I heard it also from. I used it, but I heard it. I don't know where I heard it also. I used it also myself. Yeah.
yeah. Chip, I know it's getting a little bit kind of deep into the talk, but I did want to talk to you about name the trait, if we could.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So one thing that I've noticed is that when people end up reductioing a non-vegan, and I guess at this point they're in a full-on debate, basically. And the person says that they're okay with XYZ being done to humans. What I tend to see is that the vegan, the outreacher, tends to kind of be outraged a little bit at like, oh my God, like this person's a psycho or this person's a sociopath or something like that. And kind of says to that person like, well, that's crazy, nobody in society agrees with you, or
That's good to say that, right? I think it's good. I don't know if I did. I don't know if I did that, but I think like I would want to do that. That sounds good to say that, right?
I feel like it might be a good thing. I'm just kind of, this is just something that I've only recently kind of thought of. So I haven't really formulated my thoughts on it very acutely, but I don't know if in that sense we would just be appealing, hypothetically, in this hypothetical conversation, would we just be appealing to popularity and going, kind of into that realm of bad logic, and kind of like fallacious levels of thinking. Because our whole objective is to get somebody to do the unpopular thing, to do the thing that goes against their desire for selfishness, goes against what everybody's telling them to do. To be the one at the dinner party who's gonna kind of like make a fuss for other people. And it's kind of like, reminds me of
Very good point.
yeah, and I appreciate that. One thing that it reminds me of is when I had done this social experiment with hog's milk, um, where my partner and I were out giving people. We made a sign that said like "Mother Sows," and it was just all about this pig's milk product. And when people drank it, you don't want to like laugh at them for it. You know what I mean? You don't want to act like they're doing anything that's um that's out of like that's I guess it is unusual, it is abnormal, um since most people who drink animal milk drink cow-based milk. But you know what I'm saying, like, you kind of it kind of works against us in a way if we like freak out about it, like, oh my God, you just drank pig's milk, kind of thing. You know what I mean? It ought to be viewed just as strange to drink milk from a cow.
No, I
um
completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess
It's
when we're in this thing where we're talking about the reductio and we're saying like, well, you just bit a bullet that's wildly unpopular. Um, I don't know if we're using that appeal of speciesism. Like, I don't know if it's possible to get them back to care about animals or animal exploitation from that point. It's almost just like you made an example out of that person, and you got them to not only to, quote unquote, turn their back on other species, but even on their own species. It's like, I don't know where somebody can go from there. I think this is important to discuss because name the trait type stuff comes up a lot. When somebody just expresses an outright overtly speciesist position, and you try to get them to name that morally relevant difference, if they keep playing along without storming off or running away, um, we do get there. We do end up reductioing
we
them.
do.
So I don't know, what the best way to handle. It's like a very tenuous type of situation, moments when we give that reductio. Like, what's your take on the best way to handle that?
Are you on camera when you do this?
Well, ideally, yeah. So you're saying just make an example out of them?
I'm saying like if this person, if I think so, I believe that if you reach a point where you realize that this person is not understanding the point, is maybe trying to, because there's people who are not trolling per se. I wouldn't call them trolls, but rather they are mm, seeking problems. They are like looking for problems. They desperately don't want to engage with the idea. They desperately want to go around it, say all that stuff. Then yeah, I mean, and you realize that you're never gonna get anywhere with them. Then yeah, why not? Why show them that they're wrong? At the end of the day, I became vegan by watching vegan debates. So you know some people might reach the same point. It's if you're only you and them, then yeah, there's no point. Then whatever, right? Like, you don't have to make an example out of them. But like, if you're otherwise, it's good to explain, it's good to show. And you're right that this thing, you're absolutely right. It's a very interesting thing that you say that, saying that, well, that's not normal to say, or something like that. It's not something that, it's not necessarily that it's not good for us as vegans to say it, but it's more like it could also give them power for them to think of themselves as like, look at me as this trailblazer, I say how it is, or stuff like that,
Yeah, but
which
it's
isn't
also
right.
teaching them that, when they think about veganism, or they think about things which there's this asymmetry of popularity, that the popular
Yeah,
side is the correct side. So it's almost teaching them bad logic in
exactly.
a way.
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
and I think it kind of leans too hard into the deontological approach a little bit. And I think, like, in these kinds of circumstances, some kind of a virtue ethics perspective could be good to have, where we've just established that they're not willing to, with the deontological thing, it's kind of like this extension of human rights, right? Like, I don't know of, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think, there's this hardline mentality that, we ought to not enslave other animals, ought not to exploit them or contribute to these kinds of things toward them.
Yeah,
People who hold that deontological perspective toward non-human animals also hold that toward humans.
yeah,
Whether, I'm not saying that this idea is dependent on the existence of humans. You could be the only human left in the world and still um, hold that view, and it wouldn't be relevant anymore whether that was an extension from humans or not. But I think, logically speaking, it is an extension from humans. And I don't know if we're leaning too hard into that when we give these reductios, and if it might be a better idea to try to ask questions, not necessarily, I guess maybe almost like injecting a little bit of logic into that emotional appeal, and saying, like, trying to get a yes or no answer, like, do you think that would be just to do, or do you think that would be a compassionate thing to do? So that we're kind of not catching them in this thing where, like, so if it was humans, would you do that to them too? It's almost like, kind of like taking them out of that, like, boss man kind of mentality that they might be in, where they're thinking about, just like, thinking about other beings like, checkers pieces kind of a thing, and more getting them to think about other beings from a reflective perspective, where they're introspecting on whether they're coming at something, like, this is useful for interpersonal things too. Like, instead of telling somebody that was really mean what you said, you can say, like, do you think that you came at this from kindness? You know what I mean? Like, that kind of
yeah.
little bit of emotional introspection, I think, could go a long way before the hard reductio.
But that's the question, right? The question, because yeah, it should be before that for sure. But the question is, when you reach that point, when you reach the point where you make this name the trait, it's not that have you exhausted all options, because maybe that's not the point of the name the trait, but rather, have you reached it naturally? And second, if the person, because I have met people on the street who are like, I don't give a shit about any animal. Dogs, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Humans are different, but
Mm-hmm.
humans are different. So I'm
Yep.
like, with these people, you don't have any choice but to play name that trait with them, like,
Is, is
because
is that so though? That's what I'm trying to explore. Because, like,
there's people, I know people who don't give a shit
oh,
about
no, no, I
animals,
know.
who no
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah,
connection
that's what I
whatsoever.
tend to run into more. And that's where I struggle so much to not use name the trait. I run into people who say, I'll bring up the dog thing, and they'll be like, they'll say, in some countries, their food,
China,
good
yeah.
for them, stuff like that. So that's where I really struggle. It's a complete lack of empathy, lack of concern. It's complete apathy. And you kind of get almost like cornered into being that person who's like the kind of like their predictive text could have predicted, that what's this vegan going to say? And
Yeah, but that's
what do you
the
do?
question. There's a question right there. When you're there, do you think that this person will ever understand the perspective? Because if you think that they can understand the perspective, then you just show them a different perspective, right? If you don't scale down with animals, you scale up. There's what was it? There's the aliens that are smarter than us, right? They
Mm.
can easily overtake us. There are superheroes that are smart, that are more powerful than us. They can overtake us, right? It's a conceptual thing. But I feel like when you reach a point where these people, you establish that they don't care about animals, sometimes they even become annoyed by hypotheticals. So it's very difficult to get to a point, right? So asking what the difference is, like name the trait, kind of makes sense, but they won't engage into it in it, right? But if you're at this point on camera, your point is to make veganism look as best as possible. Because if you reach this point, I don't think there's anything you can do about these people. I think there's people that will just be so closed off. I don't even think that they don't care about animals, but rather they're just so closed off to the idea. Like if they would have an animal in front of them, most people would not kill them. Most people, if the animal would be killed in front of them, most people would be like, no, please stop, or something. They would show some form of empathy. We're not talking about psychopaths here, or sociopaths, or I don't even know the correct term there, but some people will show some form of empathy. It's just that these people, when they reach this point, they're closed off for whatever reason. They closed off to the discussion, and they won't engage into it. If they're intellectually honest, then you can go up. You can do more hypotheticals and try to engage in hypotheticals. But if they're not even intellectually honest, where you don't even have hypotheticals, then name the trait works pretty well, right? Because it just shows that they have nothing. It shows that they have nothing on it. Okay, you don't care about animals. Okay, tell me, what is it that animals lack? I'll put it in all sorts of ways. But at the end of the day, if you make them look bad and veganism look good, or if you make them look illogical, it's still a win.
Do you think that when that person is in the process of coming up with a trait, that that process is helping them move toward veganism, or do you think that that's
No.
helping them double down?
I think it's helping them double down. I think all of it. Like, I think once you reach that point, once you reach the point when you're debating somebody, I don't think it matters how much logic you do. I think it's very rarely you bring them back. Maybe sometimes you do if the people aren't honest. If you're, I don't think it's even the activist that much. I think it's more the person than anything.
Yeah, it's just
But
there's this trap that we can fall into where our interlocutor makes the case for human exceptionalism, and then naturally we try to demonstrate some analogous behavior or something like that in other animals, and then we end up just getting into a conversation about animals. It's like a huge distraction. And then they bring up plants and all this stuff. It's almost like we feed them, we guide them into that very, very frustrating for us conversation. And I really hate getting into that. Like I truly hate it. Like when
I get it.
it's like I don't want to stand in front of somebody and hear them spouting off all the ways that humans are superior, and then having to be like, well, and because all the things that I have to then say as appeals to get them to care for other animals, if I am on this intelligence and that kind of thing trajectory, it's not actually what I care about. So I'm losing authenticity in that argument because it's getting me further and further away from the point where I was before somebody even walked up to me. I'm like, okay, I'm speaking up for these innocent animals. They're being brutalized and enslaved. And then here I am talking about how pig is smarter as a 4-year-old. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, I know. I mean, I think that the human to animal comparison also, I never found it to actually work. There's very few people who kind of understand it. Very, very few. And those people are generally very smart. And the people that are very smart get the other points before that, right? So this whole name the trait doesn't, in debates it works, but in street activism, I don't know. I've never got like every time I used it, I've never gotten a good response ever. Never. Nobody said intelligence, because if they said intelligence, I could have said. Nobody said. Everybody just said random stupid shit. Oh, and at the end, they always end with, "Well, humans are humans, animals are animals." What are you talking about? That's not what I'm saying. And you can't go through that, right? You can't. Well, that's a fallacy that you're committing. That doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter. Like, you'll reach a point with that person, and from that point on, it if you reach there, I think what matters is how you want to portray veganism more than making that person vegan, because I don't think you can. Not you specifically. I think
Mm.
some people are just not ready, or will always go into this. I don't know. Like for me, it's also like I have this experience where people don't speak English very well, right? Or most people I talk on the street don't speak English very well. So name that trait with them is just all the more worse, because they won't understand a large portion of it. Um, but like, even with people that speak English well, they still either bring up God or some shit, and then you end up recursive. You always name the trait is a recursive thing to me. Like, it's, you can do it if you want, if you feel very strong in it. Like, I think Harry is very strong in it, right? There's activists who do it very well, but I think it's one of those, it's a specific skill to have. Name the trait is a specific skill, because you can, first of all, name the trait can be said with, right, what's the difference? What's the morally significant difference? You can say, what does a human have that if an animal had it, it would mean that it's not okay to do it to animals. You can say, what does an animal lack that if a human lacked? You can say it this way, and you can formulate it in a couple of other ways also, like if you think about it. And all of those should be adapted to the person in front of you. Like,
Yeah.
if does that person understand the idea? But if the person doesn't even understand the perspective of how animals are mistreated, how they're just normal beings there on this planet with us, and we're exploiting them because we can, because that's why we do it, because we can. If they don't understand this perspective, I doubt that they'll ever understand the perspective of, well, what's the difference between you and them. No, that
Yeah.
they won't understand that.
Yeah. The name the trait thing, it's almost like you wish you could say it in a rhetorical way
Yeah,
where you don't really, what happens after you've asked it and gotten them to just think, if you rewind to your pre-vegan days, if somebody had asked you that, it's something that you just want them to think about and not necessarily answer and try to argue against. If you could just ask somebody that, get them to think about it. Something that comes to mind is how, there's this idea like religion asks why, science asks how, and it kind of is occurring to me that name the trait kind of asks what. And I wonder if there's a way of going about the idea of addressing human supremacy that has more of a why or a how attached to it, as opposed to asking for a what. But I don't know. I don't have anything.
I don't think I understand this point. Can you please explain it?
Sure. So, like the idea is kind of like about what I first said. Why is a question that religion asks, like why are we here, or why
Oh,
are
okay.
animals here, things like that. It doesn't get as much into the how or the what. But for example, science will ask how, like, how is it that our eyes can see? And it kind of gets into the mechanisms underlying different phenomena, natural phenomena.
Yeah,
And, name the trait is asking what, it's asking what is the difference? So it's basically pertaining to a whole range of things that exist, that are tangible, that are in front of us. And it's saying, like, basically, give me the ingredients here for moral consideration in your view.
yeah.
But I wonder if there's a better way to approach that, where we just basically kind of more say, like, how did you arrive at that conclusion? And ask an open-ended question. Maybe I'll try that. Instead of
Like,
saying,
how
like,
did they? Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
like,
Sorry.
how did you arrive at? If somebody says, well, like, because they're animals, dude. You can say, how did you arrive at the belief that your life is, maybe not your life is more significant than theirs, but that, how did you arrive at the conclusion that a 15-minute sandwich is more important than their desire to live, or something like that?
That's a good one. That's actually a good question. How did you arrive at this conclusion?
Yeah, because it's asking them to reflect on that process. And I think a lot of times
I'm
what
gonna write this one now.
yeah, do it. I think a lot of times we just need to talk more in ways that get others to introspect, and not go for the easy win, and not go for the, when I say easy win, I mean like, the humiliating them or something like that. And
I don't
obviously,
think you should humiliate them ever, by the way. I don't think that's a good way.
yeah,
I
but I
think like
think,
you should go on,
sorry, I was
sorry.
just saying, like, with name the trait, a lot of times that's kind of the thing at the end, where if they double down and you reductio them, then it's like, ha ha ha, this guy wants to farm humans who are intellectually disabled or something like that. It ends up kind of turning into something like that, like this antagonistic thing. I hate that feeling of leaving a conversation feeling like I just made an enemy.
It's gonna happen, right? But that's I get what you mean, but like some people are gonna storm off. It just happens, right? Like they're gonna leave like enemies or whatever, right? As long as you're always respectful, I think there's nothing to worry about. So that's why I'm saying like you don't need to humiliate them. I don't. That's not the point. The point is to show them that they're wrong. You can't show that they're wrong if they feel humiliated because they're wrong. It is what it is. I've been wrong. I've been shown wrong. I don't feel humiliated when I feel wrong. Everybody gets wrong. Everybody makes mistakes. What the hell? It would be weird to feel humiliated because of that. But how I feel like is like even if you do win name the trade, let's say if you say you have a great conversation, you make this name the trade argument. Well, now you don't have a great. You reach this point where you have named the trade, and he makes good points about name the trade. Like you have an active name the trade conversation, a good one with them. Even if you do win that conversation, I don't think it necessarily means that that person will change. It just, or that it means something. It will just mean that that person will be like, huh, so I'm a speciesist. I value animals less. Yeah, okay. You see, like some people actually think that. Some
And
people
it's
actually like,
ego gratifying. It's like,
yeah,
we love labeling, and we love self-labeling.
yeah. So what we, I don't know in those situations. I honestly don't know also what to do in those situations. I don't know, like with those people, it's.
Yeah, and
I tend to just say they're violent. Nobody
yeah,
likes to hear that they're
yeah,
violent, and they are violent. That's the reality. That's
yeah.
violence. You're paying
I
for
tend to
violence.
not
So
even, when I've talked to people about name that, like in a name the trait-esque way, when I've talked to them about this consideration for other animals, and they've basically said, if I've said, like, do you think that humans, that it's wrong to kill a human who hasn't harmed you in any way, and who's just going about their life? If they say no, that honestly kind of like, that throws up a thing in my brain where I'm just like, this is not a person with whom I want to continue talking. I just want this person to go on their merry way, and I'll try twice as hard with people who don't seem like, outright violent people. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Um,
And that's the thing, right? Because like even with name the trade, when you, let's say you end up these people agreeing, as you said at the beginning, with them holocausting intellectually challenged people, right?
mhm.
Let's say that happens. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Like I was surprised to find out that actually a lot of people are actually thinking that somewhere in their head. They think there's so many people who think we as a human race should eliminate people who are weak. We should remove that. Like there's a lot of people who believe that. Or even if they don't act on it, or they don't understand the implications of that, because most of these people don't understand the implications of that, they think it's an idea. It's not a bad idea, but say, yeah, it's an idea. It is something, right? Like think about all the Trump supporters. They support shit like this constantly, and there's a lot of them.
There's people who
Like
have a very eugenics based kind of
exactly.
worldview, or a worldview that like some people are just kind of born winners and some people are born losers. And
I think
yeah.
most people have this. It's weird. It's most people are like that. So like us blowing up there, like we doing that, we're just glorifying how they are. We're just, as you said, we're like feeding their ego.
Yeah, I'd like to tell people about speciesism. You know, I like that idea of asking people, have you ever heard of speciesism? And that's one of those cases where you kind of, you know, you use a little bit of emotional reflexivity and absorb and feel it out a little bit, where some people will act like you're being like a quote unquote social justice warrior, and they'll say like speciesism, and they'll kind of like mock it. They'll just like they'll pretend
Yeah.
that you're coming up with words, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But you know, even in that case, you can simplify it. You can say, yeah, it's just, you know, the idea. And you know, the idea that for example, you just give them an example, like a dog is protected legally. I always try to give legal examples when I can, just to demonstrate, you know, because otherwise people can argue that it's my perception that something is the case where it's really not. But I'll give legal examples. I'll say, if you beat a dog, that's something for which someone can get imprisoned. But if you raise a pig and kill them, you can win a medallion thing at a fair, you know, by bringing their chopped up body to the fair, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's difficult to get people to care. It really is. You know, ultimately, that's kind of what everything
Yeah.
boils down to.
And I tend to think, like a lot of my conversation actually go pretty well. I realized like they go well, but I don't know how many of these people change. And I feel like some people I feel like they will change. I feel like some people will go towards that. I don't know if they'll become vegan because if they start talking to people and they're like, "All right, you're gonna be a vegan or something." Like I think like that's kind of something we need to tackle. Also the social aspect to it,
Yeah.
but um, a lot of people understand the point. A lot of people agree with the point, and a lot of people just won't change ever.
Yeah,
Like
it's
it's
difficult too, because there's people who are like you said, kind of just the outright like, oh, vegan, and they just kind of get repulsed by the idea of kind of being like part of this fringe or something like that. But I'll tell you, Chip, it's been very frustrating and difficult for me doing outreach in places that do seem more like, so Chicago, you know, as a whole, people are kind of more informed and aware about kind of current issues than there might be in other places of the world, like in maybe more rural places of the world, where
yeah,
people are maybe more concerned with just their day-to-day routines and kind of more like, you know, working outside, manual labor, that kind of stuff. But within the very, dare I say, kind of hipster pockets within the like surrounding neighborhoods, where people might have like a roommate who's plant-based, or might have, as they call, kind of several vegan friends, you know, even if, you know, those friends aren't actually vegan, but they're just like kind of saying like, oh, I have lots of vegan friends, whatever. Like a lot of people I found, even if they're very well kind of like um, knowledgeable about what it is, they seem even more averse to it, because it's like they've already been exposed to it and they're kind
mm,
of jaded about it. Like they're kind of just like, yeah, I do what I can. I get pasture raised eggs. Nobody's perfect, like that kind of thing. And those people honestly are harder to talk to, from what I've experienced, in terms of getting them to actually care about veganism, because it's like they make it seem like your decision to be vegan is this frivolous, trivial thing that you've based your whole identity around it. It's like the thing that you've chosen. You know, it's almost like on the first day of class when everybody introduces themselves at school, you know, and then someone's like,
yeah,
my dad's a firefighter, I do gymnastics, I play guitar. And then you're like, I'm the vegan, basically. You know what I mean? So they just kind of
yeah,
almost treat you like that's your pet project, and that, you know, they've dabbled in it a little bit, or they have friends that know about it and that kind of thing. It's almost like it's just the person
They
who's very,
understand you.
yeah.
They understand you, but they don't really want to be that. They understand your point of view. They make it makes sense to them. Yeah, I get it, but nah,
Yeah,
not
and
for me.
that's worse than the person who is afraid of veganism because it's this nebulous unknown thing. It's like, oh, those other people. It's worse when they're kind of
100%.
familiar with it.
100%. Yeah, it is. It's worse, and it's also worse when they see. That's a very. This I've been also thinking about it lately, about adding the fact that it needs to be a moral obligation. I think Harry says that, and it's very good, like, because I think that kind of removes you from the whole thing of it, right? It removes it from seeming a choice, from being, well, this is a choice that I make. No, it's an obligation. It's not a choice. It's something
Yeah.
that even if I wanted to, I won't be.
And
It's
so many
like
people will
it's
treat you like you're just trying to make people like you. Like, why does everybody need to be like you? Why can't you let
yeah,
people make their own choices or something? And you talk to them, if you talk to them in terms of, well, I believe this is a moral obligation. Yeah, it's a very powerful statement.
yeah,
And it's also, we never want to seem like we are automatons. We want to seem always authentic and genuine, and
yeah,
making a statement like that, it's expressing not necessarily vulnerability, but it's in that direction. It's expressing like personal ability. It's expressing your desire to be upfront and honest with that person about your views. And kind of like Paul Bashir says, the co-founder of AB, he says real recognizes real. And I think when you come from that angle where you're like, here's my deal, here's what I believe, and you don't pretend that you're not gonna like judge somebody if they um, choose violence and animal abuse over a very easy alternative that avoids a whole heck of a lot of it. um, then you get more respect from them, and um, you end up not pandering to them, and kind of like making these kind of tangential health related, or that kind of thing, benefits from it. Makes you less like a salesperson.
yeah. That's true. And I think like if you mention it like that way, like I liked meat too. I like the taste of it, but I mean, come on, man. You know, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. If you were in their shoes, would you want that to happen to you? I mean, come on, it's that easy. It's not like, yeah, I think like if you kind of get like down, like, you lift up your sleeves kind of discussion, let me lift up my sleeves and be like, let's get real here. Come on, is it really that? Because like I feel like we have these discussions, we go revs, right, whatever, nice, yeah, haha, whatever. But then like some point, it's nice to also be like, I
Yeah, it's
like
like,
to
what's practical here?
yeah, I like to reserve that for the end of the discussion, but sometimes it's nice to do it in the middle. It's nice to, I like to reserve it towards the end because I feel like this kind of discussion really does give them a good, as you said, a good relation to you, right? It makes it feel more real. They feel like they're connecting more with you. So I feel like if they understood the point, then you connect with them. They're like, okay, it makes it way more real. It makes it way more. But if they connect before making the point, then you always have to come back for them to understand the point. So that's why I kind of feel like this kind of needs to be more towards the end. But who knows? I don't know. Like that's just my feeling about it.
Yeah, I want to say also something about what you had said about how you were running into the taste argument a lot. I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, at least I don't think I've had success in the past when I've told people that all the things that they use to season the meat, etc., comes from plants. I've never seen it click in someone's mind very well. And I think part of that is just because they're like, okay, so everything that's used to season those things is plant-based, but still, if I want that combination of tastes, then that's what I get. It's like there's still that association in people's minds. But one thing that I've had a lot of success in doing in the past, where people like have earnestly been like, wow, like you're right, or I never thought of it that way, is I've said, think of a hamburger. And I say, and I just kind of get into this little spiel. I say, you know, feel free to do this. I say, there's like, you know, you have the buns, you have the lettuce, you have the tomato, you have the onions, you have the ketchup, you have the mustard, you have the
I
pickles.
like this.
And I tell them, so then they think logically. Like he just named off what 8, 10, 12 ingredients. And then I say, and then there's a thin little sliver or whatever of your dead animal, you know, and I don't use euphemisms. I don't say beef and stuff like that. I say, you know, that's the dead animal. I say you can just take out the dead animal, you replace that with a black bean patty, and you still enjoy all those flavors that you would out of the burger.
That's a nice one. I like that one.
I appreciate that. And that gets them to think more about, you know, what the alternative is. It's not like there's this plant-based alternative that's this thing that's made in a lab or some weird chemical concoction. You're like, no, like literally you're already eating all of these things when you eat a burger. So I think maybe that might be helpful when people talk about the taste related thing.
That is very helpful. Yeah, that is very helpful. It's a good one. It's an exercise in imagining kind of what makes it, because a lot of people don't realize it, and a lot of people think it's the meat that gives it the taste. And my intent was, when saying that the spices, was my intent that the spices give the taste, not the meat. But like, this is a way better version of that. It's a way better, it's something that people can deconstruct themselves in their head, right? Think about it like, okay, how do you have your burger? Well, I don't know, just the whole wheat bread. Okay, yeah, sure, that's cool. You add some salad, yeah, yeah, some onions, as you said, tomatoes, yeah, all that.
Yeah, that's a good way to
Different,
approach it too. Just saying, how do you have it? Um,
yeah,
I think that it can be helpful to tell them that all the stuff that they flavor it with is vegan already. You know, plant based. I've done that before too. So I don't think it's necessarily like a bad approach, but
yeah,
um, I think like a lot of times it gets too much into the idea of like, is it the actual flesh whose taste that they like, you know? And it gets them focusing on the animal, quote unquote, product more than focusing on all the stuff that they're eating that's already vegan. And doing the latter helps with that empowerment aspect of just showing them like what they're capable of doing because they're already doing, you know, a significant amount of it by eating a
yeah.
burger.
And I feel like Maximilian made a good point. I used to love the taste of all sorts of prepared and processed and flavored meats. So not liking the taste isn't why I went vegan. That's also a very good point to add, right? Like, it's another one of those sleeves up. Like, listen, it's not about the taste, is it? It's about something else here, and that's one. But like, all this thing is like, because there's just so many arguments, you kind of have to go with the one that feels right in the moment, right? So if the one that feels right in the moment for you feels like, let's deconstruct like, I feel like this deconstruction of the burger feels like secondary thing to me. Like, I feel like first I gotta say, well, okay, well, taste, but taste is a pleasure. I like to say that. I like to say that taste is a pleasure. Do you think we can do whatever we want to them if it brings us pleasure? A lot of people say no. A lot of people say no to that. And then I can go into the deconstruction of it, and
I
then
always
end
get
it
a
with,
weird response. Like people look at me like I'm a creep if I talk about taste being a sensory pleasure. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the
it's
way
true.
my delivery or something. I don't know. Or maybe it's something you've experienced too. But I just say taste is a sensory pleasure. People pause and then kind of give you this like that kind of thing, you know, where they're just like, I don't know. It's never been easy for me to um to kind of equate taste with other types, or you know, even to compare, not even to equate with other types of sensory pleasure.
No, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. I think it's maybe taste is just like, I also sometimes say it's a pleasure, because if I say sensory pleasure, I like, oh, why anyway. Oh wait, sorry, give me a second. I saw that. Ulf, thank you for the 20 NOK. I don't know what NOK is. Norwegian krona, I guess. Do you like
Wow,
British short hair? New single Friday 28th. Is that the name of your single? British short hair?
that's in 2 days.
Less than 2 days.
Yeah.
I like short hair, full stop. I don't care if it's British or whatever. I'm not I don't care about countries. I really don't care. So there's that. So yeah.
Chip, is there anything that you wanted to cover that we haven't gotten to talk about?
I think like we discussed, it felt kind of fluid, our discussion, that we went kind of to the whole points of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna ask you some questions that I usually ask them at the end of it, of this thing.
Sure, go
Yeah,
for
yeah. Let's go that. Well, which argument do you feel like? What is your most annoying argument against veganism that you dislike the most?
it. It's, there's so many.
The one that you dislike the most. You're like, oh, I hate this one.
I think it's just it kind of depends. Like every different argument is kind of depending on how much time I have, or maybe just the thing where people say, if you love animals so much, why do you eat their food?
If you love animals so much, why do you eat their food? People have said that to you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not in person, but I've gotten that online a lot. Yeah,
It feels like a joke though. It's just like a trolling kind of thing.
yeah. But yeah. I guess it's not really an argument.
No,
Probably yeah. I guess maybe it's a little bit both, but the ones where people feel that they're entitled kind of grate my gears the most. Like, if they say that, if I say, well, it's my belief that other animals are here with us instead of for us, and they make kind of like theological arguments for why other animals are supposedly here for us. I cannot kind of get around that. I've had a 0%, not even 0.1, just a 0% success rate batting that one back at all.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And someone like maybe the militant vegan, Rafaela, she might respond back and saying, well, if I think that you're here for me, then XYZ kind of a thing. I'm not that direct. I mean, I'm direct with people, but I'm not that confrontational to want to go down that route with people. So I just kind of at that point just share more my perspective, and I say, like, well, like, what if you had a perspective where when you saw other animals, you just said, like, hello bird, hello squirrel, and kind of like extended that same type of treatment. I try to kind of like look at how they'll treat other animals. So if they just say blanketedly, animals are here for us, then I try to think like, okay, so categorically, there's a subset of beings who fulfill the criterion of animal with them, like, they're non-human. And so therefore, how can I get them to have a little bit more of a nuanced view and just think about it a little bit more? So I'll kind of ask them questions that try to kind of poke at whether they really feel that way about all animals. And then it's almost like the name the trait between what makes name the trait between animals, like what's a farmed animal versus a non-farmed animal, and try to get them to explain why they think it makes a difference to that animal's intrinsic value or how they ought to be treated, whether or not people are farming them.
Yeah, yeah, but if they bring religion, what I don't know. I like, what the hell do you say to that, right? Like, yeah, okay, you believe animals are here for us. I mean, yeah,
It's
that's
hard not to offend people.
it's hard. Yeah, it's because they're like, really, I like this. I don't know where I heard it a while. Like, how would Jesus kill a cow? Tell me, how would Jesus kill a describe the process of Jesus Christ, the one that you follow so much and you think is compassion. How would they kill an animal for food when they don't need to? Just show me.
Yeah, a lot of people refer to just compassionate slaughter as just being fast, with a sharp knife kind of thing, causing the
Also,
least
yeah.
possible amount of suffering, etc. But yeah.
I had an argument at We the Free with a guy who said that, oh, halal slaughter is not painful to animals. I said, it is. There's studies. And he said, show me the studies. I'm like, oh, perfect. Somebody who actually cares about the studies. So I showed him the studies, and the studies showed that if you use a stun gun, there will be less pain. And he said, see? I'm like, yeah, halal slaughter is not good. Yeah, so we can use a stun. Like, yeah, but there's still pain. So it just ended, it didn't end anywhere. So I was like,
Yeah, and I don't know
I
if they use a stun gun, if it's still considered halal. I would think that it's not anymore. I'm not an expert on it at all, but I think that there's a specific protocol, like it needs to be done kind of in the traditional way to be considered halal. I don't think that a stun gun would satisfy that criteria.
yeah, I don't think so also. So, and I don't think the problem is like when I bring that up, I'm like, the problem isn't pain. Like, even if there were no pain, I still think it's wrong. It's just wrong to take their life because you can't, you know. I see Ulf brought another. Would you two kiss for an hour to make the world vegan? Yes, I would definitely kiss Has vegan for an hour to make the world vegan. No problem there. I don't know. How about you, Has? Would you kiss me for an hour to make the world vegan?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, but I agree with you. That's a very shitty argument. I feel like I also probably dislike this argument where people go like, that's your opinion. Whereas, like, no, it's not my opinion. It's not my worldview, and it's not my morality. It's something that you yourself also agree to. It's something that you yourself also subscribe to. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it
we
can become
humans are
really.
really. I'm sorry.
No, go on, go on, go on.
I was just saying, it can be really a process of deconstructing people's rationalizations. We humans are very good at rationalizing our behavior and explaining it away. Otherwise, the guilt becomes difficult to live with. Everybody has a conscience, and when we think back to things that we did a minute later, an hour later, it's like the idea of the truth being very stubborn, the truth never going away.
Yeah.
People's memories of things that they've done never go away. I've talked to people who have, and personally, I've shared with people 2 things that I've done in my past about which I'm not proud, and those things never go away, from your memory. That there are always things that you remember having done, and the best thing you can do with your own self-talk in order to be able to live with yourself is to either say, like, this is the state of mind I was in at that time, this is the kind of consciousness I had, this is the kind of person I was, but that doesn't make it okay. It just makes it a little bit easier to live with. So when it comes to what people try to say is okay to do to other animals, they are trying to justify it to some degree, but at some level they're also trying to rationalize it. And I think as long as we can get them to accept that it's not justifiable, like you said, with logic, that sticks. If it's not justifiable, I should say, by their own worldview, then they're going to be like, man, shit, I'm going to have a hard time even rationalizing this to myself. It's like people always have to live with themselves. It's why I think, like, I'm against the death penalty. I think that not only, besides the fact that I don't think that that a government, that a state should have like a legitimized right to end someone's life against their will. I think that it might serve as a more effective punishment. And I mean, I'm not even a fan of punishment necessarily, but I think that it could have a more, let me say, rehabilitative aspect for somebody to reflect and have that time to reflect and to live with the consequences of their decision. The consequences being like their own introspective inner process that has to occur as a result of what they did,
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a good one. Yeah. It's more of a punishment to live with yourself than to just die afterwards. And
yeah, and like I said, the idea isn't even necessarily punishment as much as it is just helping people rehabilitate themselves. Even if somebody's gotten a life sentence with no parole, I mean, they still have the ability to redeem themselves, at least redeem themselves, maybe if not to society or to anyone else, at least to, at some level, try to make peace with who they are inside, you know, to try to remember maybe how they were when they were born. You know, was I born with this impulse to commit these heinous acts? And try to understand what led them to do whatever they did that got them incarcerated. And, you know, like I said, even if they won't be able to fully experience life outside, you know, outside of the confines of a prison, etc., at least they can have some version of peace with themselves where they at least forgive themselves for what they did without justifying it, but just, you know, understanding it more. You know, understanding, I think, is the root of love.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I believe in rehabilitation also, so I believe that's a good way of putting it. One thing, while you said this, I wrote it down. I realized also one thing. There's one more thing that people do. I realized it with one person is that when you talk to them and you mention, okay, what do you think about the animals, and they start justifying it. A lot of people also justify it because they don't want to feel guilty in that moment. They don't want a finger pointed at them. See, you're a bad person. They don't want to be that person, right? Whereas even if they understand, our point isn't that. Our point isn't what happened in the past, but rather what you do with the information going forward, right? So there's something that I don't do, but there's something that I think we, you, me, everybody as vegan activists should tackle this as this isn't about what you did in the past. This is about what we do going forward, something like that, because we all participate in it. Maybe that's also why it's good to say that we all participate in it. Maybe it's also good to say, because like, it's not about like, I don't want reasons why you did it. I don't care about that. Like we all had our reasons why we did it. We all had our justifications. It's about going forward that matters. Like, what will you do with this, right? So I feel like that's something that I noticed also in some people that I got to think about how to tackle it.
Yeah, I think it can be really beneficial at, you know, toward the end of a conversation to say, you know, you feel there's that kind of that's I don't want to bring in theological concepts, almost like a sacred silence. You know what I mean? Like a very profound silence where you feel like they've absorbed what you've said, and
Yeah.
just to ask them very um, you know, non-judgmentally, but very starkly, very plainly, like, what do you think you'll do? You know, so what do you think you'll do? Knowing what you've learned, or, you know, having thought about this, it's kind of like, you know, in the speech, in Gary Yourofsky's speech, at the end, he says, you know, so what's the excuse now? You know, he says, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, you know, you may not have thought about this before. And he says, that's fair. But, you know, now that you know, you know, what are you going to do now that you know, kind of a thing? You know, what's your excuse now, I think is what he says.
And that's the question. That's my question. Should we do it at the end, or should we have it also somewhere, well, not at the beginning maybe, but somewhere in the middle where we explain that it's not about that, it's about more.
Well, you know, we never know. The end is a nebulous concept, but, you know, I think
Fair.
when you felt that silence, you know, where they've kind of been like, damn, like gulp, you know what I mean, kind of a thing, then that's a good time to just ask them, like, in a very, very non-confrontational, like, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a sense of urgency to it. There is a sense of urgency. They need to understand that it's a moral emergency, but in a way where you're holding space for them and letting them see their future and then decide, you know, how they want it to pan out. Like, I tend to avoid saying things like, you know, do you want to be on the right side of history and things like that, because I think it's a very leading type of question. And it's kind of like, it's a little bit kind of like you've already kind of made up your mind that they're on the wrong side of history. And it kind of holds a little bit of like an us versus them thing. And it makes me think about, like, you know, wars and how, you know, it's like the winners told us that the good guys won, you know, in the book, you know what I mean, kind of thing, where it brings this whole tug of war too much to the forefront of the conversation. So I tend to avoid that talk about like the right side of history, but I'll ask them just straight up, like, you know, more about what they're going to do in their lives, like how, what, you know, it's almost kind of like, you know, there's stuff that you do that you're proud of and stuff that you do that you're not proud of, and it's like, are you gonna keep doing stuff that you're not proud of? Almost like an intervention with an addict, you know, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That kind of perspective, like, you know, a lot of these conversations, it's like, at best, it's like a very positive coaching experience where you're coaching somebody in doing something that ideally really quickly clicks for them. They're like, man, I've been wanting to do this. I've just been in need of a vegan to help show me the ropes or help me solidify my thoughts on this, which I've been really meaning to ask myself. And I've been avoiding watching slaughterhouse footage and looking into it because I knew that if I confronted it, I'd have to go vegan. But I'm glad that you talked to me. I'm glad that you opened my eyes. I've had those kinds of conversations, and it's beautiful and something you remember for years and years and years. But at the worst, ideally, what happens is just that it's almost like an intervention, like an intervention with an addict is kind of the best case, worst scenario, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, so in that sense, we do need to be gentle, not attacking them, and rather try to get them to think about the problem, but also about them and being thinking about changing about the problem, or trying to get them to change in that direction, or
Yeah, it's
seeing
like,
how they react to it.
yeah, it's more about getting them not to think in terms of, and I'm not correcting you, I'm just saying, kind of generally speaking, it's more about correcting, or more about getting them to think about not their own interests, but their own capabilities. Once we get into the
It's a good one.
whole, yeah, when we get into the topic of like, you know, their interests and trying to sell them on health and stuff like that, it's preferable to not go that route and instead just get them thinking about their capabilities, you know, what they're capable of doing. But absolutely, we should convince them that the problem is a big problem, you know, because that's a big part of that motivation for them, you know. That, can you imagine someone coming at you and your family with a knife and watching your whole family die? You know, that's what these non-human animals experience every day. A million chickens are killed every day, you know, that kind of thing, where they see how big of a problem it is. And it's almost like we want to go that into that angle without working against the third step, which is showing them that they're capable of making a difference, if nothing else, you know, for themselves.
I see what you mean. That's a
It's
very
like in
good
that,
point.
in Kindness Town, when they say, there's that song, you know, it's like, we might not get to change the whole world, we can change our little part of it. You know what I mean? It's just like, you just show them that at least in your bubble, in your circle, even, you know, like we said, the whole topic of like, prison and rehabilitation and all that stuff, you know, in your own conscience, you can just have a cleaner conscience, you know?
Yeah, and capabilities also match really well with the idea of moral obligation, right? They're like,
Oh,
you're
yes.
not asking them what they want to do, you're asking them if they think it's a moral obligation and if they can do it, right? Because that's what it
Yeah.
is. And then it's implied that they'll do it, not that they doesn't really matter what they want to do. It's kind of like, doesn't matter, right? It's if you can do it, you should do it. That's the point.
Yeah. I think, you know, people might try to kind of like find a way out of that by talking about people who are in remote areas of the world and say, well, like, what do you think about them and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it is good, like you're saying, to just focus on if you can do it, because maybe another option would be when they point out people in remote parts of the world and say, you know, what are they supposed to do? You can say, well, it's an obligation for them as well to be vegan, but they're doing what they can to survive. you know, so it kind of doesn't make them feel like you're just picking on them for being in a, you know, in an industrialized part of the world.
Yeah, and I also sell this a lot of the times. I also tell them, well, all the more obligation to you, because if you are vegan, if you more people in these industrialized nations become vegan, then all of these options translate to other countries also. So it's even more of an obligation. If you care about those people, then it seems to me like you should be vegan so that those people can be vegan, so that other
Yeah.
people can be vegan. When because you can, let others also be able to do that.
Yeah, it's a very classic and pretty slimy way of throwing the burden of personal responsibility off yourself, you know, by appealing
Yeah.
to the predicaments of less privileged people.
Yeah, it is indeed. It is. It is very much so. Next question. I realized I was asking the question, just realized it now. Um, what is your favorite vegan dish nowadays? Maybe something that's easy, maybe something that's delicious.
You know, I just love a basic, like, you know, the last really good dish I had was just a really basic tofu stir fry, like made with super firm tofu, not even extra firm, but super firm. Like, I don't know if you've seen them, like the high protein tofus that are not in water.
I have seen them in US. I know which one you're talking
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
like a pan saute of that tofu where it's just like a little bit kind of like browned, you know, on the around the outer surface. I
That's
love
nice.
Asian inspired cooking, like stuff with like bok choy and, you know, lots of
Ooh,
onions and like, I don't know if you ever had Chinese
garlic.
broccoli, but like that garlic and like like Chinese broccoli is kind of like a, you know, if a broccoli is like this, like a bulb thing, it'll be more kind of like wispy at the end. And there's
I
a
think I've
Chinese
had that.
cauliflower. The cauliflower is similar to the broccoli. Um,
I've never had Chinese cauliflower.
okay, yeah, like that kind of cruciferous veggie with like some, you know, some tofu and got to have some kind of umami flavor, like what's it called, like tamari sauce or some kind of like vegan oyster sauce. Kind of gives it that salty, almost like kind of, dare I say, kind of not sweet, but kind of like more somewhat caramely kind of flavor. Um,
Ooh,
yeah, that's kind of my favorite, and you got to have a little bit of ginger too. Just, maybe even like orange zest, like that. That's like my favorite kind of flavor profile, like oniony, orangey, garlicky, gingery, and then, you know, some fresh chives and stuff like that on top. Some fresh
that
bean sprouts, shredded
I know
carrots,
exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. That's fucking awesome, man. That's an awesome
some
that's an
crushed
awesome.
peanuts maybe too.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a dish, but it's like as you call it, that the flavor profile is the best way to call it. It's a really really
Maybe some shredded purple cabbage or something, like, you know, that kind of thing. Just like kind of like
yeah.
syrupy, but with like nice firm, kind of like char grilled tofu, kind of, or like, you know, very firmly pan fried. Yeah, that would be my favorite.
Have you tried? And this is gonna sound weird because I lately have been trying this. It's kind of weird. Have you tried adding potatoes at the
Kind
bottom of
of.
it? Not in it, just at
Oh,
the bottom of it, like glazing all of it with on top of some like maybe baked potatoes or something, like just glazing all of it on it. I feel like I'm doing that lately, and I'm fucking loving it.
so you
It's
mean
just
like a pan fry,
yeah,
um, but you just put like, you slice potatoes and kind of put them along the bottom. So,
yeah.
but when you're like kind of stirring it up, you leave the potatoes down there.
No, I mean you make the potatoes separately. I either
Uh,
I do them in the air fryer, so I put them in the air fryer, and afterwards I just make a base of potatoes, and then I
oh, when
put
you put it
everything that I
together.
would before. Yeah, it's I don't know why. Like it's just like the potatoes kind of they have that. It's like bread, you know. It kind of goes with everything.
That sounds really good. There's a place, I don't know if you're familiar with Chipotle. Um,
I know Chipotle. Yeah,
yeah, so they kind of have this idea where you can kind of build your own bowl or build your own burrito, that kind of thing. But there's a place in Chicago that lets you do that, but it's like more Korean style, and and they have potatoes. They don't have potatoes as a base. They have but they actually have sweet potato noodles as a base, which kind of has like a similar
Ooh.
flavor to potatoes, of course. But yeah, my grandma actually used to make this thing where she would put potatoes at the bottom of rice. So when she would cook a pot of rice, at the bottom you would have this like kind of like this layer, this crusted kind of layer of potatoes. You kind of made me think of that.
That's an interesting one. I never tried it with rice. I'm gonna write it down. I might try it with rice next time.
But I don't know how you keep the potatoes from floating up. That's what I'm not sure how she did that.
As I said, I do it separately. I'm like, but yeah, if you can want to do them at the same time, yeah, that might need some skillful handling there.
That's what she would do, though. I think maybe she would just put the potatoes in and then kind of pour rice on it without adding water yet, and then maybe just slowly add water. I'm not sure. That's what I would think,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, kind of like what's that called? The Spanish dish, with rice. I'm spacing out on the name.
I'm not sure.
There's a burned rice Spanish.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's always starts with burning the rice and then you add to it. It's very interesting. Okay, what is the worst logical fallacy that most carnists make? Paella. Martin said it. Paella.
Oh, okay. I had never heard of that. Worst logical fallacy. Maybe just well, when you say worst, is it the most common or kind of
The
the most?
one that the one that you find the worst. I don't know why. Maybe it's because you find it hard to go around or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have to probably Lee Dooley kind of spark that in my mind. It's the nature though. It's not that it's hard to work my way around it. I've found that the best way to respond to that is just to say that we don't want to get our morality from other animals, and that we're basically cherry picking. And one thing that I found really effective is just, and people have actually told me like, wow, I haven't thought of that, is just, or I like that, is when I say, do you think that we should hold ourselves, or I think that we should hold ourselves to a higher standard than other animals? That makes it very much like more like a cooperative conversation. It kind of,
Yeah.
it helps you get out of that debate mindset, and make it more of like we're on the same side here. We're trying to elevate ourselves morally, to strike out in the world in a more ethical way than the other animals are. But yeah, sometimes it's good to just say that they're cherry picking their morality and stuff like that, and they don't do what other animals do too.
It's a good one. Yeah. Yeah.
Gary
I'll
Yourofsky
use
did
this
that
word.
thing where he told that reporter like, how lions greet themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like
Yeah,
to
that's a
just
good.
talk about holding ourselves to a higher standard when it comes to that more. It's just, I say it's the worst just because it's so common. It's such a common rationalization that non-vegans, when they talk about the reasons for what they do, they'll say like, or the other thing is, we're omnivores. And
Yeah.
this is something I've noticed also a lot, like kind of in the corporate world, is people, and just more kind of like the professional world in general. People will say like, there'll be plenty of options for vegans and omnivores alike. You know what I mean? And it kind of bypasses the whole ethical thing. The opposite of vegan isn't omnivore. The opposite of vegan is something more along the lines of like a malzoan or a carnist, or maybe just non-vegan or even anti-vegan. But it's very disingenuous to counterpose the vegan position with this biological condition of being omnivorous. It completely sidesteps the whole. It's just this very sterilized, amoral type of way of approaching it.
No, you're completely right. It's dumb. For lack of a better word.
Yeah.
I'm getting a bit tired. Sorry.
No, it's
Um,
all good. I feel the same way. I haven't had lunch yet, so it's like almost 3
okay,
here. But this
let's
has
have
been so much
two
fun though.
two more
Go for it.
questions. Let's go through them.
Let's do it.
One, what is a person that, if you could pick one person in this world to make vegan, which person in this world would it be? Instantly, you just snap your fingers and they become vegan.
Um, it's it's interesting because what conversation was that? I think maybe it's when I was talking to AJ from Turning Veganese. I think that it might have been that conversation. Um, where I don't remember what it was, but recently I had a conversation where we brought up the topic of Donald Trump going vegan and what that would do to the whole world. Um, but besides him, maybe like Taylor Swift or something. I don't know, just like whoever I can think of that has the most impressionable followers, like the most people who would want to do something because the this person who they looked up to did it. So yeah, I think it would depend on just like, and also when you say vegan, you don't just mean like 'cause I'm pretty sure like Kim Kardashian follows a plant-based diet, but
No, vegan,
yeah,
ethical vegan.
yeah. So I would say like probably Taylor Swift. I think she would probably have the biggest impact because her fan base is also a lot younger. Um, and I would hope that it wouldn't be one of those cases where a celebrity goes vegan and it's like the diet of the week and then everybody just kind of switches back. Like I would hope that she would use her power to, for example, make sure that the food at her concerts, for example, like if she could work with like vegan catering companies, that kind of thing. I think she could have a really big impact in the animal abusing sector. And I think like just like I was saying, the age of her audience, I think makes them um, generally more impressionable, since her overall fan base demographic trends toward younger, like middle school, um, high school, that kind of stuff demographic. Maybe some people in their 30s or older still. Um, but yeah, the celebrity thing is difficult because, like I said, it just encourages this kind of like idolatry, and celebrities always disappoint you. Like they'll always
Fair.
disappoint you. Even Joaquin Phoenix, who gave that speech when he was accepting whatever award that was, where he talked about like the dairy cows and how we steal milk from them, even though they made it for their babies. Um, in a recent movie, he was riding a horse. It's like
Yeah.
you'll be disappointed by these people over and over and over again. Um, so yeah, that's I can confidently say that I know who I am and I know my values well enough where I won't ever disappoint. I won't ever turn my back on the animals. It's not something that I even consider remotely possible. Um, and that's really all I can count on. That's really all that any of us can count on. We all trust that we're all in this for the right reasons. Advocating for non-human animals because of a genuine sense of action, that urgency, from that spawns rather from that empathy, from that sense of justice. But ultimately, we can all only be responsible to ourselves. So yeah, I totally agree with that comment about celebrity, the celebrity thing being kind of like a vomit emoji. Yeah, from Maximili's office. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. And my final question, how do you envision a vegan world? Like, describe how you see a vegan world. I'm just curious. Like, I could easily describe it. I find like I can easily describe it. I found some people having difficulty with this question, so I just tell them describe how you would see a vegan world.
Yeah, I think there's a song by that vegan teacher who I covered this song on my channel under the music section, there's a little cover that I recorded. The song is called like A Vegan World by 2026. Something like that. The Tipping Point, I think, is an alternate title. Anyway, there's a line in that song where basically she says, a vegan world, we'll create it without weapons, without guns, without swords. A vegan world where the sky, the oceans, and the forests are our lords. A vegan world learning from history. We'll get there peacefully. A vegan world, picture it. And this is the line that I was coming to, where every cage is empty and every heart is free. And I think, that's a good poetic way to look at it. Practically speaking, it'll be very different than anything we can really envision. Maybe we can envision. I've envisioned it. I've had like kind of visions in a dreamlike state or in a meditative state where I've kind of like really felt it. And, it's obviously very depressing coming back from that kind of imagery. We realize we have a lot of work to do and most likely won't reach it in our lifetimes, almost certainly. But I think it's an example of the world that's very much fundamentally different than the world we have now. Because when we think about the system of like money, for example, capitalism, like the term, and this is from ideas from Dr. Will Tuttle's book, The World Peace Diet. Capita, it means head, and capitalism is basically a system of like heads of quote unquote cattle, which is basically implying that some animals are just inherently slaves. Like I hate that word cattle. And, the system of money, like the original words for money pertain to animal heads. The original concept of war, like in Sanskrit, the idea of war directly translates to man's desire for more cattle. So all of this kind of stems from, this is kind of, again, I'm kind of hearkening back to Dr. Tuttle's work, is it stems from the herding mentality, like to herd, H-E-R-D. And he says basically like, this is kind of where we humans have left off in terms of, we had different revolutions in the past. We've had the revolution of like, I'm not sure exactly how much he talks about these things specifically, but like, for example, other revolutions have been like the advent of fire, for example, that made like a cooking revolution. The advent of agriculture, agricultural revolution, being able to farm, not having to follow herds of buffalo or just to kind of constantly be on the move. So we've been able to establish homes and that kind of thing, do homesteading. It basically says like, that the animal, like basically the abolition of the herding mentality, the graduation away from that mentality will be the next greatest revolution. And that it's hard for us to even imagine what it would be like to build societies that aren't built on the idea of like exploiting basically the feminine principle. He calls it Sophia, that, we're exploiting the feminine principle. Like we're exploiting the ability of these animals to procreate and commodifying their bodies, the subsequent bodies that arise from that, that sexual exploitation. And by the way, I think that this is a great angle for outreach, when it comes to getting people to realize that what they're doing is disgusting. Talking about things like bestiality. I've talked to people about how there's exemptions in the US legal code for factory farming. Like in the bestiality laws, it actually mentions animal farming, animal husbandry, I think is the specific terminology used, where it says that these laws shall not be taken to apply to animal husbandry for food or something like that. So
Ridiculous.
Literally, like it should be self-evident that these animals are being like violated, in disgusting ways. The other thing is like, regardless of without even having to talk about the specific ways in which humans are touching, violating, etc., other animals, there is this hyper focus on the dairy industry as being somehow the biggest contributor to the sexual exploitation of animals. And the fact of the matter is, I don't have statistical data to say whether or not it is in terms of the most instances of the most animals being sexually violated. But in the 1930s, a chicken weighed maybe like 1.9, 2 pounds, something like that. Now they weigh like 8, 9, 10, maybe more pounds. They're not able to reproduce naturally. As far as I know, they're not able to. And the quote unquote forced insemination, the artificial insemination, forced impregnation, all this stuff is happening to those chickens as well, to turkeys, to pigs. There's a popular veterinary manual. I think it's called the Merck manual, like MERCK, where it's designed as a guide for veterinary students. And it talks about basically the processes that people need to store, like all the things that are involved in the insemination, impregnation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's being perpetrated against lots of animals, not just dairy cows, like pigs. I think maybe like to a lesser extent to animals like goats, but to many animals, it's happening. Even to bees, I'm pretty sure, like the queen bees in the honey industry.
I think the only reason why people I mentioned dairy cows is because most people think that there's not a lot of things going wrong there. So that's why I mentioned them, because just to get a glimpse of something that they think is like, not so bad. Obviously, it happens everywhere, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
that's what we do, right? We see them as products. We multiply them because we need more of them. We stop multiplying them when we don't need more of them. That's it. That's it. To them, to us, it doesn't matter what the methods are for us, as long as it's optimal and as long as they bring us the products that we need. That's all that matters.
Yeah, and I think with the dairy industry, like I've brought up similar things as well. I think something that's worked well in the past for me is just saying that they're supplying the animals for the meat industry. Like just asking them, what do you think happens to these animals at the end? When they're no longer producing milk. But yeah, I know that all that stuff anyway. It's just there's so many. It's wrong on so many levels, really. That
it is.
It's like just take your pick.
That's also the thing, right? When you do activism, you need to kind of. There's so many things to be said. Yeah, there's so many things to be said also, and like don't have information overload on that person. Just
keep it simple. Yeah.
Keep it simple. See what resonates with them, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you did your best. That's all you can hope for, right? And that's at the end of the day, I think. Yeah.
Well, Chip, this was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Has, for being here. I got really tired just now. I have an interview tomorrow morning.
Oh, congratulations. I hope it goes well.
Yeah, I also hope so too. And I don't know. Let me put in this lovely song that I usually put at the end of this. Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a pretty chill stream. I know Terry got bored earlier, but I think it was good. We had a little slow philosophical ramp up, and then we got into, dare I say, the meat of the matter, and kind of bounced outreach tips back and forth. And I definitely feel more empowered to do some effective outreach, and I feel like we've really chiseled down some conversational dynamics, and kind of both walking away with a little bit more of a nuanced perspective on like how just a blank slate of a non-vegan ought to be talked to, and then how we can kind of adapt based on the different objections and justifications and stuff. So it's been really good.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's exactly how I felt also. Like I feel like I got some things. I actually wrote down a couple of things, and that's why I like to have these conversations, to entertain people. I hope some people are entertained, but mostly to get people to go out there and speak on behalf of animals, because it's not that hard. It's nice. and you want to do it, I want to do it. We all just want to.
Yeah.
We
Not
want this
only
whole
is it
thing to
not,
be over.
yeah, not only is it not hard to not abuse animals, it's not hard to speak up for them too.
Yeah, it's not. I feel like, if you stand on two legs and you say to yourself you're defending animals, it'll be fine. At the end of the day, that's what you're doing.
We
And
all have a voice, so I find, maybe it's selfish, but the more I'm using my voice for those animals, the better I feel about myself too. The more, there's a saying like lack of expression leads to depression. I find
yeah,
that with music, if I'm not writing music, at least I need to either be performing, I need to be recording, I need to be doing something where I'm expressing, maybe some people feel that way with like visual arts. But I think there's also something to be said for our voices, and failure to use our voices on behalf of those victims, assuming we care for them a lot, I think can lead somebody into a feeling of depression because they're not um, honoring that spark of light within themselves that's just desperately trying to shine through. So yeah, definitely. I hope that everybody who's here listening and who watches this later takes some kind of motivation from this, or some kind of inspiration, maybe to do what they can in their own right. There's so many outreach channels popping up now, um, and brilliant ones. And Chip, I think you've only been vegan for like 2 or 3 years or something. It's like,
yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing to think like, when I was vegan for 2 or 3 years, like I was still making welfarist arguments. I was still encouraging people from a reducitarian type of approach. Like, that's if I had a hat on, I would tip it to you. That's like, it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
you learn, you live and you learn. That's all it is at the end of the day. It's for me it was perhaps easier because I didn't have a job for a while, so all I had to do all day is think about myself, my morality, my everything. So it became easier for me to reach this point. But yeah, it's it doesn't matter how long it takes us. It doesn't matter. I don't think any of that matters. I think what matters is that we get there and that we go and fight for other animals. That we, yeah,
Yeah, and I
do all
think
that.
there's people who maybe can't envision themselves doing activism, and I tend to believe that activism is kind of the morally virtuous thing, um, instead of necessarily moral obligation.
Yeah.
Some people have, like, maybe especially older people have blood pressure issues, things like that, and they might actually put their health at risk if they were debating people and things like that. But the
No.
least
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can do is just remove ourselves. That's the obligation. That's the baseline. And
That's the obligation. And I also think, like Anna said, I don't think it's hard to have conversations with people. You can do activism also. You don't have to go out on the streets and talk to people. There's multiple ways to do activism. So do activism how you do activism. Just do something. Do once a day. Do one thing. Just one thing. Maybe comment on a vegan video. Maybe add a status on X or Twitter or whatever, something like that. Whatever it is, like you never know who it reaches. You never know who that one person maybe slightly changes their mind. That's it's the butterfly effect, isn't it? So
yeah,
if you do that, like if we all do it, maybe eventually it all changes. So
yeah,
because that's what we're
something isn't
trying.
nothing. Something is still something. Um,
Something is still something. That's a
yeah.
good point.
Maximally Sophist says, "What's your notion of older?" I was just referring, like, I was thinking of my mom, for example. She went vegan within the last couple years, and she is very forthright about the idea that she just wants to set a good example for people, and that she doesn't want to put her blood pressure and stuff like that on the line, and to become an activist. But she still does what she can in terms of preparing food for people, and even like, when you go vegan, your presence at social gatherings and things like that influences other people, because they're like, okay, we're going to have this many vegan guests, we need to make sure that they have something that they can eat at this tea party and stuff like that. So it definitely makes an impact, like with family and close friends. I've definitely noticed.
I agree. I agree. My mom stopped drinking cow's milk. She stopped eating meat. She's not fully vegan, but well, she's not vegan. She's not fully plant-based, I wanted to say, but she's making strides. So yeah, there's that. People are changing. So you know, it's such a complex issue, such a big issue that we cannot possibly say that now doing that means nothing. No, everything you do means something. So go out there and do it.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the different types of isms that we try to avoid, like we definitely don't want to advocate for welfareism, but
Exactly.
as far as like, the reducing thing goes, I think it's important to recognize that some step toward reducing the demand for the animal derived services, goods, etc., is a positive thing. And also
Exactly.
that, even by being vegan, we're removing ourselves from that. It's like, if this is something I've mulled around a lot in my head about, if I would prefer for like 10% of the world to go vegan. The exact numbers don't matter, but or like, half the world to reduce their consumption by whatever percentage, and to try to calculate like what would be preferable. And I've kind of bounced back and forth between different perspectives where I've said, well, it's important for people to take a hardline stance on this and be difficult to tolerate, and actually espouse vegan values. But at the same time, I've thought about how reducing that demand could have such a huge impact. And obviously there's supply side economics to it too. And that's a whole nother thing we don't need to get into, about how people are kind of artificially talked into demanding these products. But anyway, yeah, this was so much fun, Chip. And thanks so much for having me on. It was really great to actually get to talk to you like face to face, even if it's through glass. And if anytime
Yeah,
you're in
true.
Chicago, definitely hit me up next time you visit, if you have any kind of visit coming up.
Yeah, think same goes. If you're in Amsterdam, we can go outreaching together.
That'd be sweet.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for being here. I'll end it here. It's a long boy. It's been 3 hours, and yeah. Thank you, Ulf, for the donations for the Nook. I like the name of Nook. I don't know, sounds funny. And yeah, go out there. We've said enough. We've said enough. Go out there. Go out
Get
there.
active.
Comment.
Yep.
Get active. Do something. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Has, and bye everybody.